Welcome in to Check the Mic. Steve Palazzolo, Sam Monson. We're live on YouTube, breaking down the AFC and NFC North here today. We're fixing every team in 5 minutes. Did half the league last week, and we're going to hit the other half this week. It is also NFL Scouting Combine week. And if you're watching this right now, Sam and I might be in Indianapolis, doing some live coverage of the Scouting Combine.
Yeah, through the magic of, pre-taping. We're able to be in two places at once. It's remarkable.
Yeah, if there's, we'll do our best, hopefully, to edit anything. Like when we say, hey, they should sign this guy, and then they do it, or they cut him, or re-sign this guy, and then he gets released, or whatever it might be. We'll hopefully fix all of that stuff by the time this is dropped. But if you're new to our series, fixing every team in 5 minutes, it's more realistically about 15 minutes per team. We'll go through, a lot of air quotes on this show. We'll go through the whole thing. From free agency to the draft, give you some options, give every team some ways to make a Super Bowl run. We're trying to fix every team here as efficiently as possible. If you haven't checked out the previous ones, we've already hit the East, we've already hit the West. They're all out there on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. And if you're watching on YouTube, just check right now. Make sure you're subscribed. Click the subscribe button, and you might as well hit the thumbs up while you're there as well. It always helps the channel, and we appreciate it. All right, Sam, you ready to go?
Let's go.
All right, we're going to start with the NFC North and the Detroit Lions. Detroit Lions are here. Thought they might be making a Super Bowl run last year, and when we do these offseason activities, they were in a great spot last year, and I thought they were even in a better spot this season with some of the offseason moves they made with DJ Reader and Kevin Zeitler and Carlton Davis. And I think those are the types of moves we're going to try to suggest here again for the Lions. I'll still call them a powerhouse, right? They didn't win the NFC. They didn't make it to the NFC Championship, but I think they're right up there, competitive enough with the Philadelphia Eagles. But there's more question marks now with the Lions maybe than there were a year or two ago.
Well, I mean, on paper, they took a step back, right? They made, they stood still, right? They almost they were in the championship game the year before and came up short of the
Technically a step
game.
back. Yeah, technically.
So on paper, they took a slight step back, but I think when you look at where they were overall this season, it felt like they had taken a step forward. And then by the end of the year, the weight of injuries had just like ground them down to the point where they weren't able to get back to exactly where they were or take the step forward and go from championship game into Super Bowl and potentially win it. So I think if you look at it that way, you say, well, this season ended essentially because of injuries, because of the sheer volume and weight, cumulative effect of all these injuries together, and that's why the season ended. But you assume these players are coming back healthy. Aiden Hutchinson in particular, there's videos out there of him starting to run now after that devastating leg break. Hutchinson was on he would have won Defensive Player of the Year, the kind of run he was on. Now, it would have been inflated because he had yet to face a real right tackle. But still, you're talking about a Defensive Player of the Year caliber impact player comes out of the game, comes out of there every game they have subsequently because of a leg break. He should be back in business next year, along with a bunch of other players that were injured. So actually, yeah, they've got a couple of holes here or there, but I feel like this Lions roster overall is in really good shape again.
No, I agree. They definitely are. And last year, I mean, we've talked a lot about the Lions team building effort and how, when Brad Holmes first got there and Dan Campbell, when they started to pair up, they went, kind of with the trenches first. They had some good offensive line pieces. They added to that. Then they just built from the inside out and just kept stacking pieces and getting guys like Amon-Ra St. Brown and Aiden Hutchinson, and they added stars, right? I mean, so here they are. And I thought last offseason was really good. And I think they replicate that, which was, hey, we need a starting right guard. Here's Kevin Zeitler for $6 million. Let's do the buy low on Marcus Davenport like the Minnesota Vikings did 2 years ago. Right. It didn't work, but I think the process was sound. Let's go get DJ Reader to put next to Alim McNeil to add more depth on that defensive line. So to me, this offseason is similar. The other one was the Carlton Davis trade that they made, giving up a third rounder to bring him in as a starting corner, but they also future-proofed that position with their first 2 draft picks. So yes, the other thing about the depth issue last year with the Lions, like it's a minor miracle that they had the number 1 seed after all of that. I mean, that was more a testament, I think, to the depth that the Lions built, the fact that they had all those injuries. But not only the depth, but also Ben Johnson as offensive coordinator, Aaron Glenn as defensive coordinator. That's probably the biggest question mark here
Yeah.
is the coaching turnover. But we'll talk talent and the roster build right here, and I think the Lions are in good shape, assuming they can keep things somewhat similar schematically.
Yeah, I mean they're going to deal with the same thing that happened to the Eagles a couple of years ago, right? Like you have both coordinators poached at the same time, and have to try and live with that and succeed through it. The Eagles obviously struggled. The Lions, like, unfortunately, it's not in our remit now to fix them because they've already made those moves. Kelvin Shepard has been is in there as the defense coordinator. Like they've made the fixes already on at the coordinator position. So we just have to see how that works out. But that's absolutely like that's independent of the personnel moves that we're going to talk about now. That's my biggest concern for this team heading into next season, and it's one they can't do anything about. This is just the reality of having that kind of success for a few years is you're going to lose assistant coaches. Ben Johnson finally decided this was the year he was willing to take a head coaching job. There's nothing you can do about that. You just have to hope you can promote from within or bring in somebody to fix those positions, and that it doesn't cause the kind of damage that it caused the Eagles, and try and continue with the roster construction. So that's where the Lions are right now. They've just had a coaching change that they wouldn't have wanted to make, but that's a reality of the league now.
All right, for the Lions at the actual moves, let's start on the defensive line. Even just 2 years ago, it was kind of Aiden Hutchinson. Remember how many times during the 2023 season, it was really only Aiden Hutchinson getting pressure, and he didn't have any compliments. That's why they went and tried to get Marcus Davenport for a year. They made the midseason move to bring in Zadarius Smith. That was after Hutchinson had already gotten hurt. So it was kind of an issue already. The DJ Reader move was still a good one. So I think they're close on the D line, but I think edge is absolutely something that needs to be addressed, whether it is free agency. But I also think they're in a good spot in the draft that, as I've said for so many teams here, the depth of the defensive line in this draft, but late first round, I think there's some edge prospects that will be available there that are potential good fits here for the Lions.
Yeah, I think the defensive line's definitely both in terms of a potential starter and in terms of depth, like that's where the repair, the biggest job needs to be done. Zadarius Smith, I think, was a really nice pickup, and I think when Aiden Hutchinson is back and firing, assuming he's 100% healthy next year, that'll be a really nice combination. Alim McNeil, DJ Reader, a really good combination inside. You still have like the total absence of depth now, though. Like Levi Onwuzurike is presumably hitting free agency if they don't retain him. John Kaminsky, like they're losing a lot of those depth players that were getting snaps along that defensive line. So that part needs to be repaired. Like they basically need a whole second team defensive line to come in at this stage.
Well, I think first round edge is the way to go for them. I mentioned Jack Sawyer for other teams. From Ohio State, I think he's a late first, early second type of player. Donovan Izaraku from Boston College. I'll have that smoother by April. Look, I don't know where Mike Green is going to end up from Marshall. Like every single time there's a new draft analyst with a mock draft, he's creeping up higher and higher. Like, oh, he might go in the first. Oh, he might go top 15. Oh, he might be top 10. Depending on where that thing ends up, I would love to see Mike Green as a potential option opposite Aiden Hutchinson. And then Zadarius Smith with one more year remaining, he's the movable guy, right? He has the ability to win on the edge, to win in the B gap, to win all over the place. I think the Lions can really juice up their pass rush in this draft. So I think the edge value matches pretty well in the draft. And then the other couple free agents I'll mention, Malcolm Kuntz as a potential buy low, had injured last year for the Raiders, did a nice job in 2023. And then how about this one, Sam? I know we already did the NFC West, and we said you never, if you're the Arizona Cardinals, you never, ever let the Barbarian leave the building. But how about the Barbarian in Detroit? I mean, that guy would become an absolute legend if Dennis the Barbarian Gardeck was signed by the Detroit Lions as a designated pass rusher. Go make that happen if Arizona lets him walk.
Dan Campbell coaching the Barbarian. That doesn't get better. The other one I would be interested in, like, I don't know if he's like, I'm only hanging around to the place that's local to me and then I'm out, or if he's chasing rings. But like, if you could convince Calais Campbell for 1 year, like, hey, you want to try and win a Super Bowl in Detroit? That would be a hell of a cap to your career. If Calais Campbell would come on board for a year, you don't need to be an every down starter. We've got 500 snaps you can take up here. Perfect for everybody. I mean, if he's into that, that would be an amazing move for them.
I love that. The other, I mean, Calais Campbell for all the contenders. I think the guy could still play, and he's pretty cheap at this point in his career. The other thing the Lions have to just kind of figure out here, they paid St. Brown, they paid Jared Goff, they paid Penei Sewell. Hutchinson's next. He's going to have to get paid, and we know that there's pretty soon that next group of recent first rounders or recent high draft picks, the Jahmyr Gibbs of the world, the Sam Laportas of the world, like, believe it or not, that's coming up pretty quickly. That, some of those guys, not so much Gibbs, being in the first round, but Brian Branch, Sam Laporta, as they head into year 3. It's not right now, but just really thinking ahead and future proofing the roster. So they have cap space right now, but they're going to be in this world, I think, similar to what San Francisco was a few years ago, where you look up and down the roster and it's like, there's a lot of players that should be making in that $20 million a year range or more, and you have to find a way to fit them all in. So it's one of those, like, you can't go crazy in free agency here, because they've done such a good job of drafting, and all their good draft picks are starting to come due as far as needing to get those extensions. I think Hutchinson's the next guy that they get locked up here pretty soon.
Yeah. I mean, you've got caps. You're right. You've got cap space now, but some of that is effectively earmarked for future spending. Like, they've done a really good job to get a roster this good and have some space to have the ammunition to future proof it by attacking those second contract guys. But that disappears if you go, well, we need 2 big high price free agents to come in to chew up all that cap space.
Where else are you looking here? I mean, I loved their bringing Kevin Zeitler in, and a couple shows ago, I said Zeitler came in and was the 5th offensive lineman. I was trying to say it the right way. It wasn't that he was the 5th best offensive lineman last year, but it was like 4 spots were really good and solid. And then the 5th guy that they added, Zeitler, that's the best late addition to an offensive line that you could have. He was outstanding last year. If they could bring him in for another 1 year, $6 million, that'd be great going into next year again with probably the best offensive line, top 2 offensive line in the NFL.
Yeah, and that's where they are again. Like 4/5 of that line are set; they're in good shape, and then the 5th spot, right guard, is a question mark. I don't know if Zeitler wants to do it again. Cool. They also have Christian Mahogany, who is another one of those guys that a lot of people loved in that draft. Maybe he's ready to step in and start at that position now that Zeitler's had a year. Now that he's had some time to kind of adapt to the NFL, so maybe that's the succession plan they have. Either way, they just need to figure out what that is, right? What the starting right guard is in this team. And then the other area is cornerback depth, I think, is a concern at this point. And it has been for a little bit. That's the one area where they've struggled the most, I think, to try and lock down like a real good answer at those positions. They're, generally speaking, I think the work that, Brad Holmes, Dan Campbell, that group has done to assemble this roster has been incredible. The one area where they've consistently just not quite been able to get the correct answer to the puzzle is corner, where they've tried the draft, they've tried free agency, they've tried the draft again, and now you're back to like, well, okay, Carlton Davis was a pretty good stopgap. He's theoretically on his way out the door if you don't retain him. Terrion Arnold, your top draft pick last year, up and down as a rookie, like the potential is there, but we're still very much potential. We're not looking at his rookie season and going guaranteed superstar the way we were with, Quinyon Mitchell, say, from Philadelphia. You've got young players there, but you definitely would want to add a guy, I think, that you like as a comfortable starter on one spot.
Yeah, is that a place where either they try to get Davis back, depending on what the market is, Carlton Davis, or is that a potential landing spot for a DJ Reed? Right. What they did last year was draft their first 2 picks, Terrion Arnold, Ennis Rakestraw from Missouri. Their first 2 picks were corners. They also match up pretty well with some of those late first-round corners that I've been talking about, the guys that were injured last year, Benjamin Morrison from Notre Dame, if they're around. But I don't know if you want to spend 2 firsts and a second on corners in back-to-back years if you're the Lions, especially when you have some of those needs up front in the trenches with the depth of this draft. So it does feel like another mix of let's hope that Terrion Arnold takes a step forward in year 2 and pair him with a veteran. And you have Rakestraw, you have Amik Robertson, you have some depth there that hopefully they don't have to tap into as much as they did this past season.
And, we'll see what this defense looks like, whether it adapts, whether it changes a bit versus what it was a season ago, given the change in coach. But they ran a ton of man coverage last year. Somebody like Paulson Adebo from the Saints, that's a physical man covered type of corner that I think would make sense in this defense, assuming it's the same as it was a year ago. I think actually,
once he's healthy, coming off the broken femur there that he had,
right?
Once he's healthy.
Yeah, I mean, like Aiden Hutchinson, right? Like it's significant, but it's an injury that you expect the guy to come back from, as opposed to like we're busting an Achilles and we might never be the same again at that position. But there's a ton of guys, I think, actually in free agency that there's no superstars necessarily, but actually there's quite a lot of guys that if you sign them, you can go into next season with them as a starter and be pretty comfortable.
One other name I want to throw out there, I know Amik Robertson can kind of play on the inside, but if you trusted him on the outside and you brought in Mike Hilton as a free agent, all these dudes who just run around and tackle and bring the energy and all, the Barbarian and Mike Hilton, like those guys, I just want to put them in Detroit. I just want to put them with Dan Campbell, and they're, great culture fits there. I think that's just another guy to keep an eye on as a potential option there.
And you don't even need necessarily to bring in Mike Hilton because, Brian Branch was effectively your slot defender. They kind of pivoted and moved Branch back to safety to accommodate like the juggling that they had to do with all the injuries. If you just said, we went back to that effectively. Amik goes outside, Brian Branch goes to the slot, and you safety is the area you need to add a guy.
And I'm not even saying it's a need necessarily. I'm just like pairing Mike Hilton with the Lions, I think would be a really nice fit. So, look, I think it feels a little bit like the Bills, the last couple of years. Disappointing finishes. The Bills overhauled things last year, but the core and the nucleus is intact. The Lions absolutely have the core and the nucleus intact from a personnel standpoint. The question is, they have to avoid what the 2023 Eagles dealt with, which was in 22, powerhouse type of team, losing the Super Bowl, disappointing finish. They have the 2 new coordinators. Massive regression in the second half of that 23 season. Lions, that's the thing to avoid. And there's nothing we could do here in February to answer those questions other than, make sure that the personnel stays strong. And I think the foundation is in a great spot in Detroit still right now.
Yep.
Fixed?
Yeah.
Yeah. Another good, quiet, but solid offseason for the Detroit Lions. All right, let's go to the Minnesota Vikings coming off a 14-win season. They've got some of the more fascinating decisions here because, look, let's be honest. Last year at this time, they weren't getting any of the hype in the NFC North. You had the Lions as Super Bowl contenders. You had the Packers, who looked like the best young team in the NFL, who made it to the Final 8 in 2023. You had the Bears with the number 1 overall pick, all this cap space, drafting Caleb Williams. They were getting hyped up. And the Vikings were the afterthought, right? We're going to bring in Sam Darnold as a bridge. We're going to draft whatever quarterbacks left, and they go up and they get J.J. McCarthy. They made some really nice moves in free agency, finally having money to spend after getting rid of the Kirk Cousins contract. Jonathan Grenard came in and had a huge year, and Andrew Van Ginkel. They did a really nice job bringing in talent. But they felt like the fourth most important team in the division a year ago, and here they are playing for the division title and the number 1 seed in Week 18.
Such a fascinating, 18 months worth of decision making for them. I mean, they finally put a stop to the Kirk Cousins thing. He gets the Achilles injury. They draw a line in the sand financially, and they say, "Look, if you're willing to play under this number, we can do this again. If you want more than this, we're going to have to say bye-bye and go in a different direction." Cousins goes off to Atlanta. That's its own saga. So then the Vikings are without a quarterback, and low enough in the draft again, like one of these teams that you're like, they might not have a great shot at one of these guys without doing something aggressive. They were paired a lot with J.J. McCarthy pre-draft, but a lot of that was contingent on trading up to go get him at, 4 or whatever. J.J. McCarthy does end up sliding. The Vikings sort of have the discipline to wait that out, don't have to give up a ton to get him. JJ McCarthy is now the quarterback, right? And he goes through preseason, kind of shows flashes, encouraging. We expect him to start sooner rather than later. And then he comes out of that preseason game and goes from like, oh, that was encouraging. And then the next day it was like, actually his knee's kind of sore. Well, that's a bit of a bummer. And then he goes for a scan. It's like, yeah, that sore knee, he's actually done for the year now. Bye-bye. And at that point, you're like, well, the Viking season just went up in smoke. Like that, everything just gone. This is now a waste of everybody's time for the next, 6 months. We're just treading water until we can get JJ McCarthy back next year. And then Sam Darnold goes on this ridiculous run where he looks like a totally different human being, plays like a top 5 type of quarterback most of the way through the season. And as you said, week 18, the Vikings are going into the final week of the regular season with a game against Detroit that would give them the number 1 seed, home field advantage, and a sort of declaration that they are the best team in the NFC, and the Super Bowl may be going through, they would be the team to really threaten a Super Bowl with Sam Darnold. Only Darnold implodes in that game. Everything unspools. The playoff game's even worse. The Rams wrecked them after facing the Lions for the second time that season, and the whole thing flies apart at the seams. And in 2 weeks, we went from, well, this team has to bring back Darnold now. Like, there's no way you could walk away from him given what he's done this season, to he completely unravels. And you're like, question number 1 is, what do you do with that if you're the Vikings? Like, do you go, that was so concerning, we stick with the original plan, which is, thanks for your service, Sam, but it's JJ's team now?
Yeah, and then let's add to the mix here when we talk about just the fascinating decisions the Vikings have. They have a ton of cap space and a rookie contract quarterback. So not only cap space now, but flexibility over the next few years. And then they only have 3 draft picks, a 1 and 2 5s.
4, I think.
Is it 4?
Yeah.
I thought it was 3.
Well, assuming you can trust any of that information out there on the web, which is sketchy at best.
There we go. They have a handful of draft picks. How about that?
Tankathon has it with 4, which is their 3 and 1 from Cleveland.
Okay, I got it. But not high value draft picks, basically. The
Correct.
Lowest draft capital in the NFL, regardless. So yeah, it's an interesting situation for Minnesota. So it all starts with that Sam Darnold decision. And as you said, when we were talking to our friend Matt Collar, who I know is listening to this, listens to all of our shows. We were talking to Matt in week 17, like heading into the Lions game. And we were saying, you probably have to consider Darnold. And to me, that decision, it's like similar to the Brock Purdy decision with the 49ers, where it's this, I've got this known commodity now, somewhat known commodity, right? I know that Brock Purdy plus Kyle Shanahan can equal high-end success offensively. And we may have learned that Sam Darnold plus Kevin O'Connell, this group of playmakers, equals success. And if you just take a step back and you say, well, the goal is to just make sure you find a quarterback that you can win with. And it doesn't matter if you just drafted a guy, like you just had an MVP caliber season from Sam Darnold. Like, if you just give him $40 million a year and it's a known commodity, go do it. But week 18 in the playoff really may have undone that enough that the more likely scenario is, we're going to tag and trade him and we're going to go with the kid and we're going to take that cap flexibility going forward.
It's such an amazing kind of outcome, because I think I did Collar's show. I don't think it was before the week 18 game, but I think it might have been the week before that. So before week 17. And, one of the topics was, well, can you walk away effectively from Sam Darnold given the season that he's had? And, we had this whole discussion, and I don't think I ever considered a scenario where what happened, right? Where what if he unravels so completely in the final 2 games, the most important games of their season, that it effectively undermines everything you saw from the first 16 weeks of the year. Like, I don't think that ever crossed our minds that was an actual possibility, that even a relatively, average or below average performance in the postseason, you're like, well, we can still, overall, this has all been really good. But the end 2 games were so bad that it's like, and not just so bad, but like the Rams game in particular, where every sack he took was like, what are you doing? Like, this is New York Jets. Yeah, I'm seeing ghosts on the sideline, Sam Darnold again. You're like, I didn't think that guy still existed. Like, I thought this had been something that was fixed, but it was genuinely like someone had hacked the operating system and just hit delete, and you went all the way back to like rookie Sam Darnold OS 1.0 in the NFL. And I genuinely hadn't even considered that as like as a possible outcome within his range of things that could happen in the last couple of weeks. And yet I genuinely think that's gone from Minnesota would have found a way to keep him, to bring him back at whatever that contract would have looked like, to now I think they're going to let him go and say, as great as the year's been, we'll always have 2024, but thanks, we're going to turn it over to JJ.
Here's the one other thing to consider that I've mentioned here before. I always talk about teams and their schematic advantage, and you lean into what do you have from an infrastructure standpoint, what do you have schematically, what do you have from a coaching standpoint that perhaps elevates players. And if you have that, for instance, say the Baltimore Ravens, can they deal with a lesser offensive line because they have Lamar Jackson and he cancels out a defender in the run game? Can they do that? Yeah, that's an advantage that the Ravens have. They don't need to have a top 5 O-line every year because of Lamar. Do the Vikings have that advantage now with Kevin O'Connell? We have mounting evidence now where a career 500 Kirk Cousins won a ridiculous number of games for the Minnesota Vikings. Like, he goes from a 500 quarterback to like a 700 quarterback with Minnesota. We have Sam Darnold, who goes from a 350 winning percentage quarterback to 14-3 or 14-4, whatever it was, right? So you have this mounting evidence, perhaps, that O'Connell and his system, and perhaps having Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison helps, that they're able to get the most out of quarterbacks. Now we have 2, and so you can lean into that and say, well, he'll get the most out of JJ McCarthy. And that comes with this added cap flexibility. We now have this 3-year window to build around him with incredible cap flexibility, and in what they haven't had in Minnesota for a while since they signed Kirk Cousins back in 2018. So I think that is the realistic move, and they can do their best to, franchise tag Sam Darnold and try to trade him, let him walk. You get the 3rd round comp pick, whatever it might be, depending on what moves you make. So that's where they're at. But I think at the end of the day, it's going to be JJ McCarthy's team a year from now.
I think it is as well. Number one, the way they've been talking about it, it's sort of been it's been in the theme has been like, thanks for this season. Darnold's done great things. Bye-bye. So I suspect that's kind of where it goes. And also, they moved around a payment to Byron Murphy to basically give them time to work on a long-term deal. They effectively traded, we will remove the ability to franchise tag you in exchange for you moving this deadline back a bit to give us a little bit more breathing space to try and make a deal happen, right? So Byron Murphy either stays in Minnesota on a long-term deal or he goes to free agency. But the point is, that's a move that like signals we're trying to make this work. They could have done the same thing with Darnold. He has a similar bonus, and they didn't. So the fact that they haven't tried to make that happen suggests to me again that they're not trying that hard to keep him around. And I guess that frees them up the franchise tag to potentially use on him. But I get the impression that this is going the way of, it was one amazing season for Darnold, but we're going to let him go get paid somewhere else. And we're going to turn the keys over to JJ McCarthy, who was supposed to have them this time a year ago.
And then, so when we look at the rest of the roster, assuming it's JJ McCarthy going forward, the bitter taste in your mouth coming out of those games was not only Darnold, but the pass protection wasn't great. We know Christian Darrisaw was injured, and they did a nice job picking up Cam Robinson. Timing worked out really well to pick up Cam Robinson at the deadline. He's a Vikings free agent technically. I mean, he's not coming back. It'll be Darrisaw and Brian O'Neill at tackle. They're still solid there, but a hole at right guard. And with their money, are they in the Trey Smith sweepstakes here at right guard, trying to shore up that interior?
And because they don't have draft picks at the moment, they need to spend. Like the free agency is their pathway to making things happen. That game, those 2 games, late in the year, felt like the sort of watershed moment. Like the interior of the Vikings offensive line has been a weakness for years, right? And Kevin O'Connell's offense definitely helped it, and it made it, it patched it over a little bit. But like the idea that like if you went back to the first couple of years of Garrett Bradbury's career and told somebody that he would still be the Minnesota Vikings center in 2024 and 2025, they think you're insane. But somehow the guys persisted because they've just been like, well, let's not bother to upgrade this too hard. Same with the guards. Like they've been persisting with these players for some time now, and not really upgrading. This feels like the kind of watershed game, like the Chiefs Bucks Super Bowl, where you're like, okay, we need to change something fundamental with this and go in a completely different direction. I do think that they're going to try and upgrade that interior pretty hard this offseason. Maybe they're in the Trey Smith sweepstakes. There's a lot of teams out there with money to spend that also need guards, so maybe that money goes too high. But I do think that guard and maybe center is definitely an area where they are going to look to spend this offseason.
I think Tevin Jenkins, the former Bear, might actually be better value, for the money than a Trey
But
Smith.
a much bigger injury risk.
Yeah, you got the injury risk there. Mekhi Becton, 1 year at right guard for the Eagles. I think all of those guys are potential
Also
options.
injury risk.
Yes, always for Becton. But the Bradbury thing is fascinating. His career PFF grades, the consistency is incredible, Sam. 57, 61, 60, 67, 60, 62. That's 6 years into his career. Everything's pretty much between 57 and 62 in his pass blocking grades. Always the weaker part of his game. So I could see this, especially with J.J. McCarthy, his first year as a starter, year 2 in the NFL. I could see Minnesota trying to upgrade there. So I don't know if they're in the free agent center market, if they're going to look at Drew Dahlman potentially, but I could see a lot of moves being made there at both guard spots and at center to complement their one of the better pairs of tackles in the NFL.
Yeah, I mean we've flagged Drew Dahlman before as a guy that's available. I wonder if Ryan Kelly, again another injury risk, but would be a buy low candidate. Ryan Kelly at least has got some fairly extensive tape of being one of the best centers in the NFL when he is healthy and a little bit earlier in his career. Maybe that's a risk they want to take. Maybe they can convince Kevin Zeitler to play in Minnesota for a year. Like I don't. It's tough because I think actually it's a solid enough group of tackles available in free agency. I don't know that it's a particularly good group of guards, and there's a lot of teams that need interior help more than tackle help. James Daniels, another guy with good tape, but coming off an injury. Like there's a ton of these guys who are coming off major concerning injuries or just have major concerning injury history. Again, sometimes these are the positions you put yourself in, but like there's not a ton of guys that you look at this and saying, okay, good news, Vikings. There's players available and money to spend. Maybe Brandon Scherf, somebody that's always underachieved relative to his draft status, but is solid as a right guard, is a good enough upgrade for them that they'd go in that direction.
The other place to take a look at is cornerback, and it was a crazy offseason for the Vikings last year at corner. Obviously, the unfortunate death of Kyrie Jackson as a draft pick. You had Mekhi Blackmon get injured pretty early after a really nice rookie season in 2023. They were stitching it together last year with Shaquille Griffin and Stephon Gilmore. So if they do bring Byron Murphy back, as you've already talked about, we're still talking about 2 starting corners likely needed. I mean, Blackmon probably steps back into one of those spots. But either way, cornerback depth and just replenishing at that position, that's another one of those teams picking at the back end of the first round that matches up with some of the cornerback depth, I think, in the late first round of this draft.
Yeah, I mean, that makes the most sense, I think, in terms of a place to spend a first round draft pick. Like both starters last year effectively were late, veteran pickups to try and come in and like completely repair. I mean, their season was a lot of that. Like cornerback, they had to basically repair a starting duo close to the start of the season. Cam Robinson comes in to repair the left tackle spot that went down before the trade deadline. Like they just patched up this team, and unfortunately, that's what it does to your draft picks when you make like good move. Like Cam Robinson theoretically rescued Minnesota's season last season. They could have gone from Darisaw, one of the best left tackles in the NFL, to like a non-viable starter, and suddenly the whole offense falls apart. Instead, you get Cam Robinson, who was good enough that let you contend for the number 1 overall seed and, keep you in it. Only now it's like, well, you didn't win a championship. You didn't progress in the playoffs. You kind of spiraled off and blew up at the end. And now you don't have the draft pick that you had to trade away for Cam Robinson to come in and fix it. Like it was a very short-term move that did work, kind of. But now you're living with that. So, yeah, corner at the back end of the first makes a ton of sense. Byron Murphy, even if you bring him back, is more of a slot guy anyway.
Yep.
On paper, Mekhi Blackman should be one of your two starting corners, but he's a young corner coming off an ACL injury. That's not a great spot to be in. So, you could realistically be in the market for two starting corners still.
I could see in free agency, Travarius Ward could be a fit, right? Because Minnesota has the money. He's going to be probably one of the highest paid corners on the market. The other potential connection, Brian Flores connection, Jonathan Jones, New England Patriots, free agent cornerback that I think could be a decent fit there in Minnesota. But I think either way, they've got money to spend once again. I think we're talking O-line, we're talking secondary, probably some defensive line depth with the money. And then, can they take those 4 draft picks and flip those into 6 or 7? Fascinating to me that Kwesi, the analytically sound GM, is the one that was, trading up and trading out future picks and everything. You would have assumed that he's the guy that would have been, sitting there with 12 to 15 picks every single year. But he's been aggressive, and they made some moves last year to get Dallas Turner. Had to make some moves to get Cam Robinson in the building immediately, and so here they are with 4 draft picks heading into this.
But that's the other thing is, they're picking 24. That's probably going to be a pretty solid spot for a first round corner. But I think almost what needs to happen is this team needs to get out of 24 and be picking, 34, be picking 10 spots lower down to amass another couple of draft picks. And all right, you still might have some, solid players there. But I do think this team in an ideal world wants to be picking 10 spots lower in the draft than they currently are on paper with a trade that gives them some more draft picks.
All right, have we fixed the Vikings? JJ McCarthy's team. We've fixed the offensive line with a whole bunch of options. We're going to draft a corner, free agent corner. The only thing we didn't talk about is the D-line depth, but they'll figure that out as well. Second wave of free agency there. Good?
Yep.
We're on to the Packers. Packers, they're always one of the tougher teams to project here because they don't play a ton in free agency. They do draft in high volume overall. It tends to work, and usually look up and down their roster and you're like, oh, they've got pretty good players in most spots. And it's not really a star driven team, like it was a few years ago. That was like the big narrative that we had, right? It was like, this is Aaron Rodgers and Devontae Adams and Jair Alexander, and then a whole bunch of depth pieces. Now it's not so much star driven. You have Josh Jacobs saying they do need a star. They need a wide receiver 1. It's just a whole bunch of pretty good receivers. We need a 1. So interesting offseason here for the Packers, who remain one of the best young teams in the NFL, consistent young teams right now.
Yeah, it's funny. They've gone from like one to the other, right? They've gone from a team that was kind of like the Rams, stars and scrubs, to now it's like the baseline is really good, but there's no stars. There's almost a complete absence of stars, to the point where one of their better players is saying we need a star number 1 wide receiver. They've gone from all we have is a star number 1 wide receiver in Devontae Adams, and that's not good enough, to now what we really need is a Devontae Adams, to this bunch that are all pretty solid.
They should get a guy like Devontae Adams.
Overall.
Yeah, that's what they should do, is bring in Adams.
It's back.
Funny because if they had Romeo Doubs as a 2 and Christian Watson as a deep threat and Jaden Reed as a slot when Devontae Adams was there, that'd be pretty nice.
I mean, it sounds crazy, but like you plunk Devontae Adams on this depth chart, it would look pretty amazing as a wide receiver group, right? You've got Devontae as the number 1 star, who I think can still be something pretty close to that player. Maybe not 100%, but even at his age, he can still do a really good job as a number 1. And then you have all these guys that are, limited or specific skill sets. Now they all get to be one down the depth chart and just bring their facet of play to the table, as opposed to trying to be on the aggregate Devontae Adams. Like you would have Devontae Adams and those guys being Devontae Adams in the aggregate. So it sounds nuts, and I don't think it'll happen, but Adams on this roster would actually make a ton of sense.
So that's what we're going to do there. He gets released or whatever by the Jets, and then bring Devontae in. I mean, look, is Josh Jacobs wrong? I don't know. I mean, I thought last year that they had enough of those pieces that it would work, but you just have so much inconsistency from Dontavian Wicks. Jaden Reed had that weird dynamic where in losses he would go for like 9 catches for $130, but in wins he'd catch 1 pass. I mean, there wasn't. Do you need a consistent go-to guy? I don't know, but you need a consistent passing attack, and it was kind of up and down last year for Jordan Love in his second year as a starter. So I don't know if you need the alpha one, so to speak. And if you think you do, okay, great. There's like 12 of those guys in the world and they're not available. So sorry. I mean, you could try to draft somebody, but it's certainly not the draft, in the 20s to just go get the next Devontae Adams unless you stumble into something.
I mean, if Adams is interested in, chasing rings, the Packers, I think, are contenders in any given year. Like that,
Yeah.
that roster is still loaded, young, and good across the board. Adams would materially move the needle for them, I think. And obviously, he's got the familiarity, presumably some affinity for the Green Bay organization area, the whole thing. Like, it is a sell that makes sense, I think, from both sides' point of view. I don't think that that's crazy to put if Adams ends up hitting the market to pair him back with Green Bay.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's viable. I'm not saying it's like the number one priority here, but if if things work out, at least make the call. I'm good with that. What else are you looking at here? They Josh Myers, the starting center, is a free agent. They have a couple free agents on the defensive side of the ball. But again, when you look up and down the roster, it's like most starting spots are filled. The probably other biggest storyline is Jair Alexander's. I think he's run his course as a Packer. He's probably out. They've had some pretty good young corners, but again, it's not star driven. It's like, yeah, we kind of like Carrington Valentine. He's played pretty well, right? I mean, they could use some cornerback depth there. Keyshawn Nixon wants to be a full-time corner, but they could use an upgrade there. But again, you look up and down the roster and it's solid or cogent pretty much everywhere.
Yeah, defensive depth generally, I think across the board is where I would target. Like the defensive line has bodies, but the young guys didn't get better last year. I mean, former first round pick Lucas Van Ness has not developed at all. Carl Brooks had meant that didn't matter necessarily. Like Carl Brooks in his rookie season looked really good and that he was going to become a really important sort of interior rotational pass rusher for them. Didn't get better at all year two. And so that's two guys that were playing like 800 combined snaps or whatever. Kingsley Enagbare had some flashes, but generally wasn't particularly good. So you've got a lot of guys that have been brought in the last couple of years that should be getting better, and maybe they will in year three or whatever, but they haven't yet. So, if you go into this season relying on those guys taking a step forward and they don't, you're weaker than you thought you were going into the year. So I would want to see some kind of influx of defensive line talent. Quay Walker is still playing snaps for this team. That's a problem at linebacker. You don't want that to be the case. I would look for another linebacker. Edgerrin Cooper was phenomenal. They finally gave him a full-time starting gig by the end of the year. You still need a second linebacker from somewhere. And then, I think cornerback depth. So all defense, basically. Defense, find yourself starting center, go get Devontae Adams again.
All right. That was we literally fixed him in 5 minutes.
Yeah.
That was it. That was the
first time we've ever done that.
Yeah, 5 minutes. We actually did it. For the 18th straight team, I'm going to say, this is good. You want defensive line depth? Well, this draft is good for you. Picking at 23, 3 picks in the top 87. You could double up on the defensive line. The Packers are known to double up at various positions. I think that could be a good move, and they could also be in that late first-round corner market, as I said, for many, many teams. I think the value and the need is matching up pretty well for a lot of teams, I think, for the first-round corner. So I'd be fine either way for the Packers going that route. The other name I wanted to throw out there was Senior Bowl hero Gray Zabel from North Dakota State. If you want him to step in and play center, incredible pass protection performance during the Senior Bowl against all of the big school guys. He handled himself well, could play guard, could play center. We know how much the Packers love that positional versatility. They have last year's first rounder Jordan Morgan, who they're calling a guard, was a college tackle. Like, they love playing that game. Gray Zabel feels like a Packer, does he not?
I mean, nothing more on brand than Green Bay drafting a college tackle and moving him inside somewhere at the next level. That's what they do to all their offensive linemen, seemingly. Look, Gray Zabel.
They were paired with Grant Barton a ton last year, who was a tackle who moved to center and didn't work out. But you could see that this year with Zabel.
Gray Zabel did really well the Senior Bowl, but what was maybe most impressive is he was doing it at all 3 interior spots. Like, they were moving him around the entire thing. He wasn't just settling at one spot and looking good. They were using him in all 3, and maybe he looked the best at center, honestly. So I think that makes a ton of sense. A guy that's been You mentioned Mike Green just goes up and up and up every mock draft. Gray Zabel, same thing. We've gone from, day 2 guy to appearing at the bottom end of firsts, getting all the way up to 23. I don't think would be crazy for him. And it would, give them potentially a plug and play day 1 starter at that center spot.
There was a point in the Packers' history where they very rarely played in free agency. They're still less likely to dabble, but it's not unprecedented, right? Last year, they paid a ton of money for Xavier McKinney, the top safety on the market, and it paid off, man. He was outstanding, great ball skills, turned the ball over. It was a really nice fit. They got Josh Jacobs last year, right? They actually paid money for a running back. So they will dabble in the free agent market, but the majority of their team is homegrown. They're going to draft and develop, re-sign, keep those guys in-house. I don't know if there's any great specific free agent options that completely upgrade this team, because they're solid across the board. And I think it's kind of stay the course, draft, add that defensive line depth, as you said, and just continue to improve that way.
Yep.
That's 8 minutes.
It's the fastest we've ever done it.
We're not gonna stretch this out. We're not gonna go any further. We did triple for the Vikings.
Well, okay, give them some draft picks. Like, where do you want them to go? We gave them Gray Zabel. Who's your corner? So we go Zabel. Second round corner now is what you need.
So at 55, where's the consensus board as of right now? Oh, my guy, Trey Amos. Yeah. Ole Miss, Trey Amos. Get him in there. He's at 53 in the consensus board. Maxwell Hairston from Kentucky, another Kentucky corner. Darian Porter from Iowa State. Get one of those guys in. Zy Alexander in the 3rd from LSU. Is this a double up? Which position are they going to double up at this year?
I mean, they're always going to make the most sense to double up at.
So double up at corner. Let's go Trey Amos and Zy Alexander. Get a couple SEC corners in there in the 2nd and 3rd round.
All right.
With Gray Zabel. Easy. Now, the issue here is we haven't leaned into the D-line depth now. We haven't done that. You can't do it all with all your draft picks. You're going to have to pick up defensive linemen later. And the crop in the 4th round, it's not going to be as clean as the first.
Or that's where you dip into free agency a little bit. Maybe they get some of those middle tier free agent defensive linemen. Maybe Poona Ford hits the market and they're able to bring in Poona Ford.
Love Poona Ford. Levi Onwuzurike, good fit there as well. Add more solid bodies there on the defensive line. Buy low on DeMarcus Lawrence, like I said, the Eagles should do. Get more bodies.
And then I would grab, if he's available in free agency, Cody Barton to be my second linebacker. I want the absolute antithesis of Quay Walker.
That's Cody Barton?
Yeah.
All right. Look at that.
Or, no, here's a better one. TJ Edwards may be a cut candidate from the Chicago Bears. They're looking at like both those linebackers that they spent pretty sizable money for a couple of years ago. And they're like, wow, what are we doing with all this money tied up in 2 linebackers? I think they may end up cutting TJ Edwards, who's not coming off a particularly good year, but is the absolute antithesis of Quay Walker. Like, freaky athlete who's a terrible football player versus amazing football player who's a terrible athlete. That's what I want. I'm going to go the complete opposite direction. Pair him next to Edgerrin Cooper, and my linebacker core is now amazing.
Yeah. Next to Edgerrin Cooper, who just flies around and crushes people.
Yeah, so I don't need TJ to be a great athlete.
All right, perfect. Nailed it. Packers are fixed. Let's wrap up the NFC North. Chicago Bears. Very interesting offseason here for the Bears. Finished with 5 wins last year. Disappointing season, given that they started out hot, had Caleb Williams. It looked like they had a really nice infrastructure for him. They had some names at receiver, but the pass game, everything was inconsistent. We have Ben Johnson coming in, complete overhaul of the coaching staff. So Ben Johnson coming in as the head coach, coming over from the Detroit Lions, and they've got money to spend because you do have Caleb Williams. You have the rookie contract. Where do the Bears go this offseason?
The biggest priority has got to be the interior of that offensive line. Again, the Vikings would like to upgrade maybe the entire interior of their offensive line, but they're at least under contract. The Bears, literally, I think their starting interior is all out of contract. They actually, nobody on paper is currently there to take this team next year with Caleb Williams, your most important asset, playing behind this group. So the tackles are fine. Braxton Jones, Darnell Wright, okay, cool. The interior is a mess and needs to be completely overhauled in an offseason. So free agency and the draft, we got to find 3 starters, I think.
We've mentioned Drew Dahlman as a center, Ryan Kelly at center. Kelly missed time last year, but prior to that, pretty durable overall. I think they got to grab one of those guys. Center was a massive issue for the Bears last year with Coleman Shelton. Do they try to bring back Tevin Jenkins as one of those options? The other potential thing, Braxton Jones, I've seen talk of him maybe moving into guard, the starting left tackle, and maybe upgrading left tackle. Even though I think Jones has done a pretty nice job there. The one spot that they, somewhat solidified was Darnell Wright. Looked pretty good in his second year last year at right tackle. So I think literally all the other spots, like they could go left tackle, move Braxton Jones inside, but either way, there's going to have to be a lot of moves on the O-line here.
And that might be the approach, simply because so many of the guards have like major injury question marks about them, and centers as well. Like the biggest thing they need is, because you have to bring in 3 effectively between the draft and free agency, you want somebody is going to be there every game, like start as much as possible. So that might be their biggest issue. Is I don't know which guy you can target that you're comfortable with being durable and out there every game. Again, unless you're able to win the Trey Smith sweepstakes, assuming he even hits the market from Kansas City, and you do that, you're in this world with a bunch of other teams with money to spend who are also needing guards. Like if you can win Trey Smith, great. That's one spot locked up. If you can't, maybe you need to get into the tackle market, grab one of those guys and move, Braxton Jones inside, simply because it's better value, or there's you're more sure about the tackle market than you are about the guard market, who all have these injury concerns.
Could they go Cam Robinson maybe at left tackle, kick Braxton in at left guard, just pick up Trey Smith, just go Trey Smith and Cam Robinson? Now grab Mekhi Becton at right guard and Ryan Kelly at center. There we go.
Solved. I mean, with the money they have to spend, like they should absolutely be one of the final couple of teams in the Trey Smith, battle. I mean, New England makes the most sense, right? They have by far the most cap space. They have an acute need on the offensive line. Frankly, if New England doesn't end up securing Trey Smith this free agent period, I think they failed. Like there's no reason they shouldn't win that bidding war if it comes to it. But the Bears are one of the few teams that can kind of go with them to fairly silly money and still make that happen.
So definitely have to attack that in free agency on the offensive line. I think the D-line depth is still something similar, to the last couple of years. They brought in Montez Sweat, Gervon Dexter's progressed, I think, as they've hoped, but they still have needs on the interior defensive line. Their run defense took a hit once Andrew Billings got hurt last year. They could use one of those big-bodied 340 to 360 pounders that are available in this draft. I think they also have the ability to maybe pair the Sweats together, right? Because they have the money. They got Montez Sweat. You bring in a Josh Sweat, have a double Sweat off the edge. That's in the world. That's in the right. That's in the world of
the edge.
It's in the realm of possibilities here, because their rebuilding effort. Remember, a couple of years ago when Ryan Poles took over, kind of the opposite of what the Lions had done, where it was like trenches last, right? They just didn't get around to building the defensive line. They traded for Montez Sweat, drafted a couple interior defensive linemen. I think there's still work to do up front there on the defensive line.
Yeah, I mean, definitely depth. The offensive line, I think, is the big acute concern. I would definitely put them in the defensive line depth, marketplace. But like, if you could come out of this draft, or if you could come out of this offseason, maybe they get Trey Smith as their top option. Maybe they swing and miss there. But like picking 10 overall, depending on, there's enough teams out there, I think, that are scared of what Will Campbell is as a tackle, that he might be there at 10. You could get Will Campbell, move him to guard, or keep him at left tackle, move Jones into guard. Either way, you fix one of those spots. If you could get Trey Smith, Will Campbell, and then start cooking in the second and third round for the other needs, now you're in business.
Yeah, I like that. And then, you don't have to maybe spend as much money at on a Cam Robinson at left tackle, like I was saying earlier. So yeah, I think at 10 they're in a prime spot to get either the Will Campbells or Kelvin Banks of the world, or that just the next defensive lineman. We've mentioned James Pierce for a lot of teams, or Mike Green. Is that too high for Mike Green? I'd love to see them get one of those top pass rushers as well to pair opposite Montez Sweat. I like Austin Booker as a developmental prospect, but they just need more. They have to get out. They need some more juice up front. The other question I have with Ben Johnson and the way he's run things, right? I think he's been outstanding. 3 straight years watching his offense evolve for the Detroit Lions, but he started with that foundation of a great offensive line. I imagine he's gonna. Ryan Poles he's an O-line guy, right? I imagine that is going to be the focus for various reasons, where the Bears want to make sure that they address the offensive line first and foremost this offseason, as we've said.
Yeah, you couldn't be going from, two different, more disparate situations, from like the Lions, whose offensive line is the foundation of everything they want to do, to Chicago, who literally doesn't have an interior right now. Like, that has to be number 1, 2, and 3 on their priority list this offseason.
The other place to look, pass catcher. Keenan Allen was kind of a 1 year. Let's see how it goes for Caleb Williams. We have Rome Odunze last year, drafted pretty high, kind of have an inconsistent rookie season. DJ Moore had an inconsistent season. Caleb Williams had an inconsistent season throwing to them. How do they want to handle the pass catcher situation? Because again, on paper, it looked really nice, right? DJ Moore, young Rome Odunze on the outside, Keenan Allen as the dependable slot guy. Didn't exactly work out as intended for various reasons.
Yeah, and I think it still is a pretty good situation. I think you now do need that third wide receiver, though. I mean, 3 strong at wide receiver, Cole Kmet at tight end, but like 3 strong at wide receiver is a really good place to be, and I don't think you would want to lose that with Keenan Allen moving on. I think you just pick up, but this is like where you draft a guy, right, in the mid-round somewhere, hoping that he can be your third/slot option.
Now, the Bears still have a 2 from the Bryce Young trade from the Carolina Panthers. They still have a second-round pick left over from the Bryce Young trade. So they're drafting at 10, 39, and 41. So they have almost back-to-back picks there in the second round. Golden opportunity there. I do think the defensive O-line or D-line value is going to be there at 10. The opposite position, perhaps, or especially, if they go O-line first and then one of those defensive linemen, given the depth, maybe at 39. And I think the receiver value there in the second round could match up. I think the needs and value might match up really well here for the Bears. Receiver-wise, I'd love to see some speed, generally. I think Odunze can move and everything, but he's still more of a contested catch type of receiver. I would love to see some speed there. I don't know if there's any great speed receivers in the draft. Just saying generally, I'd love to see more of a vertical type threat here to complement those guys.
Isaiah Bond being one of those second-round picks, maybe, or even
Tez Johnson,
the third would be an amazing spot for them.
This is your Tez Johnson option. I think Jalen Knoll, he can move. We're sitting here right in we're doing it's combine time right now. It's Wednesday of the combine. The receivers are going to be working out in a couple of days here, so we'll get more information about the actual 40 times and everything. But I would just love to see a little bit more juice added to this receiving core to complement DJ Moore and Rome Odunze.
I also wonder what his stock is going to be coming off an injury, but Colorado State's Torrey Horton was a guy I loved last year looking at tape. I haven't heard his name mentioned yet this season, I think, given that injury, but that's a guy I'd be really intrigued in the mid-rounds.
All right, man. Anything else on the Bears? I think just depth generally on the defensive side of the ball. I remember Jaquan Brisker looked like he was off to a promising start to his career. He had the concussion issues last year. We didn't see him past October. I don't know if they need to address safety perhaps, but it's kind of similar to the Packers, where we'll see what happens with TJ Edwards and releases and all that. But there's not a whole lot of starting spots or places to replace on the defensive side of the ball. But you just want to add some depth and some more impact players as much as possible.
Yeah, cornerback is a little bit of a question, given Tyreek Stevenson winding himself in the doghouse with the the Hail Mary mess and subsequent things. But it's not an acute, desperate need. You're right. Just generally across the board, I think defensive depth is an area they could focus on. But like we said, number 1, 2, and 3, interior offensive line, find yourself a wide receiver 3 so you're good, and then add some depth.
All right, man. Have we fixed the Chicago Bears?
Yeah.
Fixed. I mean, and then the bottom line is Ben Johnson and Caleb Williams working together, right? There's nothing we could do to fix that other than say, I mean, I'm interested to see what this looks like. I thought Caleb Williams, if I was to describe Caleb Williams' rookie season, inconsistent certainly comes to mind, right? There was like pockets of 2 games where it looked great and pockets of 2 and 3 games where it looked terrible. And he was just kind of a roller coaster, but like in 2 and 3 game bunches. And when it looked good, I described it as natural talent being accentuated, right? When you saw him playing well, he had that game against the Vikings with 5 big time throws. And I'm not saying every week we need to see him, making these throws on the run and everything, but it has to feel natural. It has to feel like he's just playing the game and not overthinking. The times when it looked bad, to me, he was overthinking. He was like sitting there like, I got to sit in the pocket. I got to read it out. And it just wasn't flowing. And whatever Ben Johnson has to do, it's as much play call and design as it is making him feel comfortable, making like he could just be instinctual and play football. I think that's the biggest thing for Ben Johnson. Not the play calls, not the scheme, but just get the best instinctual football play out of Caleb Williams. I think that's when he's at his best, and that's what I'll be looking for early on in the season with that pairing.
Yeah, I mean, in theory, it's an exciting matchup. It's one of the spots where I think everyone would have wanted Ben Johnson to go in terms of like this guy is being talked up as, one of the preeminent offensive minds in the league the last couple of years. Look what he's done with Jared Goff. Well, now we get to see, okay, what can you do with Caleb Williams, who was being talked about as one of the most exciting prospects to come into the league in years, was sort of overshadowed by fellow rookies, guys like Jaden Daniels in year 1. Now, what can you do to him?
All right, man. Fix the Bears. And we did it. We did a good job with that. Let's go to the AFC North. But first, just give it a look. Make sure, if you're on YouTube right now, make sure you're subscribed. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't done it already. Hit that thumbs up for this video if you haven't done it already. Helps the show. Helps you stay informed. And hit the bell as well, right? So you know when we're going live, as we do 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday here on Check the Mic. AFC North, let's start with the Baltimore Ravens. Another one of those teams. I think they've got less to do this year than last year. Remember last year, they had a lot of questions on the offensive line and where they were going to find a couple starters, either in free agency or the draft. Not a ton of specific spots to fill here. Patrick Mekari is a free agent. They only have a couple receivers under contract, so they'll definitely need some receiver depth, even though the 1 and the 2, Rashad Bateman and Zay Flowers, are back. Perhaps a starting linebacker, but they have options there. I think the 2 biggest ones probably in the secondary are Darius Washington at safety, had an awesome season last year, breakout year. He'll hit free agency, and then Brandon Stevens, probably the weak spot in the secondary for them last year, also a free agent opposite last year's first rounder, Nate Wiggins. So not a ton to do for Baltimore, but the big question, how do you get over the hump and make that Super Bowl run, get through Kansas City and Buffalo?
Yeah, and I think it would make a ton of sense for them to bring back a Darius Washington.
Yes.
Round 1 in all the team building offseason stuff is always re-signing your own players, trying to prevent guys from hitting the marketplace. Safety is one where I think it's very achievable because I think it's a flooded safety market this offseason. I don't think that those guys are going to get big money. So Baltimore, I think, should have a pretty reasonable task in their hands to convince a Darius Washington's agent to say, hey, you're not going to get massive money in the open market. Sign with us. We love you. We'll do this deal. So keep Washington in the building. Yeah, they're another team that needs a starting guard from somewhere, but I don't think that's necessarily like they're not in the Trey Smith sweepstakes. They don't need to go big to make that happen. They just need a starter from somewhere with Mekari hitting free agency, and maybe they want to bring him back as well. And then, yeah, like wide receiver depth, and maybe that depth, they're in a strange spot where generally, as you said, they've only got a couple of guys under contract, but they're 1 and 2 on the depth chart. That being said, that doesn't need to be the case. Like if they found number 1, each one of those guys could easily become 2 and 3. So they need depth, but the depth could actually be the number 1 wide receiver that they need to find and have potentially needed to find for years.
All right, let me circle back to receiver, but just to touch on Darius Washington really quickly, just fascinating case. He had less than 150 snaps in his career, 2021 through 23. All of a sudden, plays over 800 snaps, starting safety, 86 PFF coverage grade. It was like Mike Renner 2021 draft takes, justified essentially for Ardarius because he was a really productive college player, never had injuries, never really had opportunities at the NFL level, and was just making plays every single week for Baltimore. So I think, yes, just get him back right after what you saw from him last season. I'm with you. Like we've debated before how much Baltimore needs the quote wide receiver one, and I think Zay Flowers has been really nice, and Rashad Bateman has been good, and again, air quote wide receiver one. I don't know if Baltimore needs that guy. I don't know if that guy is necessarily available. But what would you do there? I mean, is this? We've talked about Devontae Adams for other teams. Is he the type of guy that you need here, or would want there? Or is it just, hey, just get as many speed and quicks types of players that add to Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry and, just make it difficult for defenses in that way?
Yeah, like it would be more. I think Bateman made a really big difference to that team last season in a way that he hasn't always in his career. Like I actually think he's developed into a much better receiver than he was early on, and injuries have certainly been a part of that. I'm not saying, you need to go find that guy. And certainly, they don't have a ton of money to spend in free agency. I think they could spend most of it in locking up guys that they want to prevent hit the market like Washington. But like if I was drafting a wide receiver, late in the first round, 27 or whatever, if that guy became my number 1, 2, or 3, it's a good move from their perspective, right? So I think that's basically my only point with that is there's a spot on that depth chart available, and we just don't know where the spot is. Either way, it's a move they should be making happen. So, like, if they went into this draft, you pick number 27, there's a wide receiver there that you like, you grab that guy. Anywhere he fits in the top 3 of my depth chart, it's a good move, I think, for them.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the Ravens' moves here too are just stay the course type of moves. They've got good depth. I think their defense overall took a bit of a hit from where they were in 2023, but the second half of the season was much better than the first half. They're another team. I know they drafted Wiggins in the first round last year. They're the other team that I'll mention as a cornerback option with that first round pick, right? To pair with Wiggins. Could be back-to-back years where they do draft corners in the first round. Marlon Humphrey has kind of settled in as more of that nickel type of, movable piece. They do have that as an option, but the starting outside corner opposite Nate Wiggins, I think, probably the biggest need heading into this offseason. And so they could dabble in free agency. I think that's probably more likely a draft pick there, though, for Baltimore. And then, like every other team, there's a little bit of future proofing. Travis Jones is coming due soon here from a contract perspective. You're going to have to pay Kyle Hamilton and Tyler Linderbaum over the next couple of years as far as former first-round draft picks go. So I think just depth on the defensive line for every team is important. But as Kyle Van Noy gets a little bit older and Adafe Owe, gets the end of his deal, just more defensive line depth. So I think the edge draft market could work out pretty well for the Ravens in the first, or the cornerback depth, I think, in this late first round could work out pretty well for them as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think all the areas of their need are likely to be pretty solid spots at that area of the draft in 27. Where do they pick beyond that? They're in the second round, 59. So, 59 gets you again. I think this is a good draft for the positions of need that they have. I think you're going to get defensive line depth in that second round spot. Maybe that's a spot where you can get your guard. If you don't bring back Mikari, if you don't dip into the free agent market, there might be a starting guard available at that spot in the second round. So, yeah, I think the Ravens are going to have options.
Are they a Tez Johnson type of team, or is that too redundant to Zay Flowers and his skill set?
I think it depends what you get out of Tez Johnson. What he's going to get a lot of Tank Dell comps, right? Because of size and because of speed. Right. Even though Dell's workouts were a little bit weird.
And because he's really good and you want to make him work.
Right. But the difference between the two, or one of the big differences between the two, is that Tank Dell in college was deployed as a legitimate number 1 wide receiver as opposed to you are tiny and fast, you're going to play a gimmick role, and then we will scale up your usage as you become like a good player. He was a number one wide receiver, so there was years worth of tape of a team, an NFL team to look at and say, he can make this work at that size, and maybe we have to protect him a little bit, but like he can be a real wide receiver who just happens to be tiny. Whereas Tez Johnson was deployed very much as a gimmick type of receiver. And so now you're in the world of like Rondale Moore, where it's like, okay, we love what you can do, but we have to project what you did in college to like the role we're going to need in the NFL and figure out if you can do that. Now, it's not as extreme as it was with Rondale Moore, but it's the same idea, right? You're taking this guy and projecting him into a role that you don't really know if he's able to do. Whereas the Tank Dell thing, you had already seen him doing the stuff you're going to be asking him to do. So I love Tez Johnson as a player. I think he's dynamic and dangerous and a fascinating prospect, but I don't know if he can do the things that Baltimore would want him doing, or if you're going to be stuck with effectively two guys that are short area, horizontal, underneath, manufactured touch monsters, and like Bateman is your only real wide receiver at that point.
That's just like where I go with Lamar Jackson at quarterback. I'm not saying a Devontae Adams wide receiver one type wouldn't work there, or if he had like Mike Evans or someone as a an X winner on the outside. I'm not saying that wouldn't work with Lamar. I just don't know if you ever need it with Lamar Jackson because of the other advantages that he creates. And when you lean into those mismatch types, those space type players, or say like a Savion Williams from TCU, who's 6'3", 230 with they were giving him running back snaps at TCU. Do you just want more of those types of players where any given week it's like, oh, by the way, try to stop Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry and this 230-pound receiver that we're just going to move around, and Zay Flowers, right? That's the only thing I'm thinking, with the Ravens, where I don't know if Lamar is ever going to be the guy that's just going to pepper the ball 15 times to Mike Evans on the outside or Devontae Adams or whoever it might be. The one other thing we do need to discuss is the Mark Andrews discussion here with Baltimore and the idea that they could move on from him. They do have Isaiah Likely. I mean, it is one of the better 1-2 punches in the NFL when it comes to tight end. Of course, Andrews had the big drop in the divisional round game. That's not the reason that they're talking about potentially moving on, but they have Isaiah Likely, and they could move on from Andrews and replenish the tight end spot in a pretty deep tight end draft as well.
Definitely possible. I think, I wouldn't be rushing to do that given how good he's been for them. Yeah, it's something they could do, but a move I wouldn't be falling over myself to make happen without needing to.
Last thing, Makari's the starting left guard. They just had an issue with Ben Cleveland off the field. Right. He's a free agent as well. I mean, I think they're going to have to address that spot. I could see that being anytime through the draft. I don't even know if they're going to dabble in free agency there.
And Faalele at right guard. I mean, former offensive tackle, kind of convert, moved inside. He's been okay, but not great. I mean, he's definitely better, I think, at guard than he is at tackle, where his movement is a problem. But he's not so good that you're like, we're completely set at that spot either. Like they should be in the guard market this offseason.
Would they go guard first round with Tyler Booker if he was there? I don't know. I think they'd rather go with the corner or defensive line depth there or receiver. I think they'd go higher value positions, but just something to keep an eye on.
Yeah, I mean, they could be a team looking for, a guard in the second round if they could find one, as opposed to, I agree with you. I think they've got bigger priorities or bigger value positions that they would want with that first round pick. But in the second round, like I think they could definitely be potentially interested in interior offensive linemen there.
All right, man. Have we fixed the Ravens?
Yeah.
Super Bowl, baby. Next year we get over the hump. All right, let's go Cincinnati Bengals. A 9-win season. Are the Steelers up next? Steelers are up next. Sorry, Ben. Look at that. Steelers. I scrolled down too far. It's the Pittsburgh Steelers. They're up next. What a weird season the Steelers had, right? They got to 10 wins pretty quickly. Looked like things were different. Looked like this wasn't just Mike Tomlin sneak by and be over 500 type of team. This was a contender. They were good on defense. They were more explosive on offense once Russell Wilson took over, but it all fell apart once they faced all the good teams down the stretch, and including the playoff game against Baltimore. So interesting times in Pittsburgh, right? I think they've made QB moves last year that in the short term were fascinating. They barely spent anything for Russell Wilson and for Justin Fields. I think theoretically it worked. It got them to 10 wins in a playoff berth. But you may have mentioned this when we broke it all down. The ceiling was low, right? The ceiling is low when you make those moves. And we saw that. They hit a ceiling when they're trying to compete with the best teams in the NFL. So Pittsburgh has to solve this quarterback situation first, and then everything else around it, another solid roster for the Steelers.
Yeah, it really is. QB's the question again. I mean, is this a team in the Aaron Rodgers? Is this a team where Aaron Rodgers actually makes sense? And because there aren't that many of them,
I've been on the strong no for Aaron Rodgers bandwagon. I would say of all the teams, though,
generally, or just specifically to the Steelers.
No, generally, because most of the QB needy teams are in rebuild mode, right? And most of them, it's like we're resetting the culture with the Raiders and we're resetting with Tennessee, and I don't like any of those fits. My thing with Rodgers is if he's going to go somewhere, he's got to play under a head coach and an offensive coordinator, especially an offensive coordinator that he didn't choose, and he's going to have to buy into whatever that system is. So, of all the places, is this Mike Tomlin superpower that he can get Aaron Rodgers to come in and just be a Pittsburgh Steeler for a year and do it their way? And now at the end of the day, does that feel like another Russell Wilson move, right? Like picture this season playing out. There's some games where like Rodgers has a big game and him and George Pickens are firing and all this stuff. But then there's other games where it's like, oh, the man's, in his 40s and looks like it. And we've actually hit a ceiling here. Like I could see that playing out exactly the same way. But if it's a buy low, it would be a buy low. It's not going to be a big investment in Rodgers financially. So like theoretically it could work again, get you to 9 or 10 wins and a playoff push. But are you beating the Ravens? Are you beating the Bills? Are you beating the Chiefs? Probably not.
Well, it's interesting because we're starting now to get a little bit of pushback all the way through the season. Remember, everyone was just trashing Rodgers, particularly the shouty shows, right? We're just like every week, like Rodgers is garbage. He's done. He's washed. He's got to quit. All this stuff, right? And we were sort of saying all the way through, okay, obviously this isn't going well, right? They're losing games. It doesn't look good. The offense is a mess. On a throw-by-throw basis, though, Rodgers is not playing that badly. Like we are not looking at a guy who's just completely imploding and is terrible. And, it's not like final year Peyton Manning where he was awful. And like there was very little discernible difference between Peyton Manning and Brock Osweiler the year that Peyton Manning actually won his Super Bowl and got to ride off into the sunset. Like Manning was done and yet somehow crawled over the line because the Denver Broncos had one of the best defenses in NFL history that year. We weren't looking at that with Aaron Rodgers last year, despite coming off an Achilles injury at 40 plus years of age. So I think now you're starting to see this little pushback in this offseason that I think will grow as it goes from people making that point now. It's like, hey, Rodgers actually didn't play that badly. And if you look at his numbers and, he's actually his numbers and Josh Allen's numbers aren't that far apart from each other and blah, 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 right?
But they are. I mean, if you just look at touchdown to interception ratio, maybe. But
correct.
That's not
I'm not saying
reality.
I'm not saying the argument is sound. I'm saying what you're hearing now is a little bit of pushback in that direction. So I think now you're going to get this growing sentiment over the offseason that actually there is a pretty good season still in Aaron Rodgers and maybe a year or two. Tom Brady's got 5-6 more years in him. But maybe, people are going to look at this and say, actually, there is a year or two of solid Aaron Rodgers play, and not just solid, good Aaron Rodgers play still in there. And I think that's true. The big question, though, last year was, well, if he's not playing badly on a throw-to-throw basis, and yet it still looks worse than it did with Zach Wilson there, what's happening, right? How much of this is Rodgers is just such a bummer that he's like bringing everyone down? How much of it is this idea of when he just does what he wants, so the offense isn't anywhere near as efficient as it should be? Like, it's the other stuff that was the problem. So if you bring in Aaron Rodgers and you pair him with Mike Tomlin, not that Tomlin is the offensive coach, but like a guy that's a strong-willed leader of men in Pittsburgh, right? If Rodgers is willing to be coached in a way he was coached with or by Matt LaFleur, right, where he came in and said, "Look, I don't care what you want to run. This is what I need you to run because this is the way we get the best version of you on the field." And there were some teething problems there, but eventually they got on the same page and it was great. If Tomlin is able to do that to Rodgers, right, go head to head with him, win the battle of wills, and basically get Rodgers to do what Rodgers needs to do, then I think it could actually produce really good results, like better results than Russell Wilson was able to produce within this offense. But I think that's a massive gamble. Like that's a I am putting my job on the line gamble from Mike Tomlin. Now, he talks himself up a lot, right? Like this is why I get paid the big money, making calls like that. That would be a hell of a ballsy decision because I think if it didn't go well, it would cost him his job.
I would have concerns about it working for various reasons, right? I mean, we've talked about the throw for throw thing with Rodgers, but most advanced metrics have him as horrible last year. PFF has him a little bit higher. I think part of that is, again, he's not getting blamed from a PFF perspective for like the entire scheme, which I think
Right.
he actually gets some blame for, right? Now, the other thing is, you're right. I've said, hey, you go get coached like you did with Matt LaFleur. Matt LaFleur, though, I think we've realized is one of the better play callers in the NFL.
Sure.
We're going to go say, go get coached by Arthur Smith, who doesn't necessarily have a history of elevating his quarterback, his passing game. So I don't know, man. I look, this is just the situation that they're in. They have to draft somebody this year, regardless. Like you have to have some sort of eye to the future. If you're the Steelers, I'm not saying they have to go Jackson Dart in the first, like we saw from Field Yates mock a couple weeks ago. They have to draft somebody. So I think they're going second wave quarterback before they play in the Rodgers sweepstakes. I'm making the call for Matthew Stafford. We saw those rumors out there. Like, would I give up a 1 for Stafford for 2 years? I might do it if I'm Pittsburgh to continue to. It's like playing the Saints salary cap game. Continue to just push it down the line when I need to solve this thing. I'm at least making the call for Stafford. I don't think it's going to happen. But of all the teams where Rodgers could land, this is the one I think I could stomach the most, which would be the Steelers.
So, okay, first question. If you called up the Rams and said, we're willing to offer you pick number 21 straight up for Matthew Stafford, do the Rams say yes?
It's the closest they are to saying yes. I still think they might say no.
You
made a great point on the NFC West show. Like, why do they opt in?
If I'm the Rams, I wouldn't do that.
Yeah, like if every team that we struggle to fix, it's like, what do we do at quarterback? Why would the Rams opt into that? Other than being forward thinking and saying, well, we're going to either let Stafford run out his contract in a couple of years, or we can get this first round draft pick, and that will be a better long-term play for us. But I do think they're still in this kind of window where Stafford can go out there and win, and they could make a bit of a run with him.
But I'm not even sure that it is. It's obviously a better situation to have an extra first round draft pick at the point where you don't have a quarterback, but you're accelerating the point where you don't have a quarterback. So it evens out at best. And actually, I think it probably is a net loss because you took away a chance of winning a championship, right? So I wouldn't do it if I'm the Rams. Now, I don't know that means they won't, but so my point being, to me, that's not happening, right? So then you get three options if you are Pittsburgh, GM Pittsburgh. Number one, you put all the chips in the middle for the Aaron Rodgers gamble. Number two, you're drafting Jackson Dart or whoever your favorite QB3 is at 21 overall, and that guy's starting day one. Or number three, we're re-signing Justin Fields and we're giving that a shot again. Which is your favorite?
I'm going to re-sign Justin Fields and draft somebody. Oh, man. That's it.
That's who your Fields is your option.
Yeah.
Okay.
You want Rodgers?
I mean, I'm not gambling with my job. I'm gambling with Tomlin's job. So if I'm gambling with somebody else's job, yeah, I want Aaron Rodgers. If I'm gambling with my own job, then no, I'm probably re-signing Fields and grabbing somebody in the draft.
The biggest issue here is not so much 2025. I think it's 26 and beyond, right? I don't think the Steelers want to be in the situation where they're guessing about quarterback again. It's why we say a lot, like, did they miss on Kenny Pickett? Yes. Could you make the argument that they could have drafted him in the second or third round? Sure. but you still have to take those chances, right? Like, not if they added, we had this discussion a few weeks ago. If they just had Trent McDuffie on this team, the guy that picked right after Kenny Pickett, if they just had Trent McDuffie on this team, they still don't have a quarterback. They still don't have anything solved. So the idea that they, quote, wasted pick 21 or whatever on Kenny Pickett a couple of years ago, it's not a huge deal, really, because they needed to take a shot and see. And if Kenny Pickett was the guy, the payoff would be, massive compared to Trent McDuffie or whoever else you could take. So they got to take shots on quarterback. I think this is a draft to at least get somebody else in the building. And Fields might be the best bridge quarterback because we've at least seen him with Arthur Smith. There were signs of improvement, his ability to just kind of get rid of the ball a little bit quicker, hit his first read, throw the ball a little bit more accurately. They were 4-2 with him. They leaned into his running a little bit. There's something there, but you're still trying to have that eye toward the future. So you have to draft somebody second round or later.
Yeah, I mean the mistake was not drafting Kenny Pickett with their first round draft pick. The mistake was putting themselves in a position where they needed to make that happen. I know people had said when we brought this up before, it's like, well, they drafted Mason Rudolph, right? But okay, yes, he was a guy that a lot of people liked reasonably highly in that draft, but he went in the third round. That, generally speaking, a third round. That was
4 years prior, though. Like, you have to do that every year, right? When you're trying to move on from a Big Ben at some point, you have to draft the third or fourth round quarterback every year, hoping that somewhere there's a Russell Wilson or a Brock Purdy or whoever that actually takes over at some point.
And the reason you have to do that is because, generally speaking, a third round pick on quarterback is not a serious investment. Like, it's hey, if this guy turns out great, fantastic, but we're not expecting it, right? Like, Kellen Mond is a third round draft pick, which made sense at the time, but like, Kellen Mond had almost zero chance of actually becoming the guy and taking over it, So yeah, they did at one point think, what the hell? We kind of liked Mason Rudolph. Let's spend a third round draft pick on him. But that was not like a serious succession plan to Ben Roethlisberger. And the lack of a serious succession plan to Ben Roethlisberger was the problem that eventually put them in a position of needing to draft Kenny Pickett in the first round in a draft where it doesn't look like that should have happened. Here's a question for you, though. And this wouldn't necessarily shape our fixing of the team, but how much pressure do you think Mike Tomlin is actually under this season? Because, again, they had their standard season of good, not a losing record, but people are getting pissed off that they're just not going to win a playoff game. They're almost the Dallas Cowboys, except without the 12-win succession thing of, like, you can get good, you can get into the playoffs maybe, and that's it. We're no closer to actually winning in the playoffs, and people are tiring of that the way they tired of it with Mike Shanahan back in the day, where it's like, hey, this succession of really good seasons is great, but when was the last time you actually won a championship? Get out of here.
Man, your comparison to the Cowboys actually isn't a bad one. Like, the difference is that in 2008, Mike Tomlin won a Super Bowl.
Right.
And if that didn't happen, which it did, if that didn't happen, where's the tolerance for being a good but not really competitive playoff team? Because they're getting whooped in the playoffs. Like, they're getting outscored by like 1 million in the first half over their last 5 games or whatever it is. The analyst in me says the quarterback's the biggest driver of all of this stuff, though, and the fact that we're still sitting here debating 41 or 40, whatever he is, 40-year-old Aaron Rodgers or year 5 of Justin Fields, the fact that we're still debating that stuff is the thing I would defend Tomlin with, right? Which is like, the head coach can only do so much. There's only a handful of head coaches that really win with multiple quarterbacks. And even the great Bill Belichick was not well under 500 without Tom Brady. Like, that's just the reality of the NFL. And so with Big Ben, Tomlin can compete for championships. Without Big Ben, it's kind of a minor miracle that they've never had a loser, that they continue to be that good, right? So it's almost like I almost like want to see him with that next opportunity with a good enough quarterback, but I completely get the idea that change for change's sake might need to happen just to try to get the Steelers, onto the next era, so to speak. How's that?
The Mike Shanahan comp is interesting to me because, I mean, Shanahan's Super Bowls were what, 98 and 9? And then they fired him at like 06, something like that. You're getting
97, 98. And then he like stitched it together with Brian Greasy post John
Yeah.
Elway, and
But
then
you're
Jay
like,
Cutler right at the end.
you're getting an actual number on how much credit in the bank a ring gets you, right? Like you get a Super Bowl, that's great. You're now untouchable for like X years. We're getting X. We're getting a figure on what X is based off Mike Shanahan, Mike Tomlin. Now Tomlin's in Pittsburgh, so you get even longer. You get X plus 1.5 or whatever based off it being the Steelers, and they don't like to make moves. But like this is how like the credit is gone for Tomlin now. Great, you won a championship. You're undeniably a great coach, but the credit is all evaporated now, and we are like the fan base. I think is fairly fed up of only being good, not being great.
And you're in this world where you need to be great to compete with the Ravens, who have a great quarterback and a great organization, to compete with the Bills, to compete with the Chiefs, right? I mean, that's what you're trying to do, and it's been multiple years of them clearly the Steelers being a step below that group. So we can't solve Mike Tomlin. We can't solve head coach. What else can we do? Honestly, I'm not inspired whether it's Aaron Rodgers or Justin Fields. I think the answer at quarterback is like take some swings, right? Draft two. Take swings there. What else from a roster perspective do we need to focus on for Pittsburgh?
They need a left tackle. I mean, Dan Moore Jr. has been their left tackle for years, and
No,
they've never been happy with it.
Fautano is going to play left tackle.
Okay, so that's our answer at left tackle.
Fautano at left. I know it looks like they might be losing starters on the offensive line, but Mason McCormick was a rookie last year and stepped in. He'll probably play right guard for James Daniels. Fautano probably at left tackle. So I think they've got 5 starters on the offensive line. The only question is if you're like already ready to maybe move on from Broderick Jones at right tackle, but I think it's still too early probably for that. So I think they've got 5 starters up front.
I mean, I don't know that it is too early to start thinking about moving on from Broderick Jones. I would definitely add a tackle.
Bring in competition like a Morgan Moses. No, bring in competition. Sorry, I just had to help you there because I know which depth chart you're looking at here, and I think
you're right. But
it's improperly sorted right now.
But given that we don't know if Fautano is going to be good and Broderick Jones doesn't look good at the moment, I would absolutely add a tackle to that mix.
Yes. Yeah.
And whether that's your Morgan Moses counter, whether that's Jedrick Wills reclamation, kick the tires project, whether that's a more serious swing at it and you bring in a Cam Robinson, which allows you to keep Fautano on the other side and beat out Broderick Jones, like those two go toe to toe as opposed to asking them to be your 2 starters. I would definitely be adding a tackle of some description. And honestly, if I'm adding a starter, I'm not sad about it.
And then I think the receiving core, we have a ton of questions. I think George Pickens has been such a fascinating player because in some weeks it's like, yeah, this dude's a wide receiver 1, and other weeks not so much. You've got he's fighting people, he's doing all this stuff, and it just feels like a ticking time bomb, like every good Steelers receiver under Tomlin. So I don't know what you end up wanting to do with that, right? Do you feel like you can say, hey, Pickens is our 1, just get him, a speed guy opposite him, get him more consistent options next to him? I mean, it was him and then Van Jefferson as the 2 last year because of some injuries and Deontay Johnson moving on. Either way, I think the entire receiving core needs to be addressed.
Yeah, because we don't know what Roman Wilson is yet, right? Like he was their 3rd-round draft pick last year who basically didn't play at all. So we don't know if he's just a potential slot competition for Calvin Austin or if he's like a real viable potential number 2 opposite George Pickens. That could change. And maybe at this point you can't rely on him either way. So you got to go back to the well and draft a guy. But yeah, I think offensive line, offensive tackle depth, whether it's starter or a backup competition, wide receiver depth and or starters. I think those are the 2 biggest areas of need.
Yeah, absolutely. They have a lot of draft capital. And so, I mean, I think Omar Khan as GM, I think overall has done a good job with most of the roster. And, that's how I evaluate my GMs, man. It's like all the non-QB moves. How well can you create the infrastructure? But at some point, you got to make the right QB move. And so I think it's they have to use. I mean, I might draft 2 quarterbacks with all the draft picks that they have. Just get 2 of the Dylan Gabriels and Jackson Darts of the world in the building, and hope that you can hit on one of those guys there. But I
Like,
like
I mean, what would you go? Where would you go with 21 if? So it's either Jackson Dart effectively or something else. Like Dart would be the only quarterback you would think about drafting at that spot, right?
yeah, I think I'd rather go best player available there, and then where are they in the second? 53, 85. Probably go second round quarterback and like fourth round quarterback. Go Dylan Gabriel and you know Will Howard. Just get one of those guys in. And I think and look, this is me drafting quarterbacks. I don't think our opinions matter a whole lot. I don't think anybody's great at evaluating quarterbacks. So you take shots on the guys you think are the best, but take multiple swings at it with all the draft capital that they have. I would get two of those. Get Will Howard, Dylan Gabriel, and Justin Fields competing this year. That's what I'm doing if I'm Pittsburgh. Like you have to be outside the box thinking, I think, if you're the Steelers right now, in how to solve this quarterback situation. And I think they did that last year. That was outside the box thinking. Like nobody was yearning to get Russell Wilson in the building to get them a Super Bowl, but there was a chance that he could hit a ceiling and get there. And Justin Fields, as a reclamation former first rounder, there's a chance he could get there. That's good outside the box thinking. But it's a 1 year. I thought it was a good move. Do something like that again. Justin Fields plus now 2 draft picks, right? You're uncovering every stone to try to find the next franchise quarterback.
It was great business. It was sound process, but it was almost always likely to be a short-term solution to the problem.
Yes.
And that's fine. But now you're back in the situation where you need another solution to the problem, short or long term. So I don't think it's a reflection on what they did last year that they're back here again, other than simply, again, these are all this is the root of this problem is half a decade ago. It's not last year, right? It's the fact that the succession plan to Roethlisberger was bad, and they're still dealing with that because they hadn't fixed it. And last year, I think, like last year's moves exist in isolation. They were good moves at the time. They were shrewd business. It was a good gamble to take, but it was almost always going to be just for last year. So the problems now are the consequences of years ago.
All right, man. I don't know if we've solved anything for Pittsburgh other than laid out a lot of their issues. I've given you something though. I think a double up on this deep-ish quarterback class, intriguing quarterback class. I think that's a way to go. As far as other spots on the roster, I think they've got a starting offensive line. We have to attack receiver. I think the receiver value. I know you like Luther Burden. I think that would be a really nice pick there at 21. I could go that route. I'm going to take the best player available there. It could be receiver. Any of those defensive linemen that we've talked about, depending on who falls, just continue to replenish there. Cornerback opposite Joey Porter Jr. is a big question mark. I think the cornerback depth in the draft is there. I think they could also go the Travarius Ward or DJ Reed route as far as starting corners go. Rasul Douglas, I think, could be a really nice fit in free agency. I would love to see, just a nice cornerback duo, Joey Porter plus someone. So I could see them going free agency or just, going with the way the draft falls in that first round.
And the other position we haven't brought up yet is running back. Like Najee Harris is going to be a free agent. I doubt they're going to want to bring him back. You've got obviously Jalen Warren still there. I don't know if you want him being your only real threat at running back. Cordell Patterson's still theoretically on the roster. His workload, his impact was wildly scaled back. So in a deep running back draft, I think they should be grabbing somebody in the mid rounds to come in.
Yes. Scattaboo.
I did want to bring him up, but I was like, we already mentioned him a ton. But Scattaboo as a Pittsburgh Steeler, the black and blue, or the black and yellow, the black and blue of just cold AFC North winter.
The AFC Central. He's a perfect AFC Central running back.
Right. The black and blue division is the NFC or the AFC North?
I don't know. It could be both of them.
Because I've gotten that wrong before.
Yeah, don't worry. We'll just edit it out. Could you imagine?
Yeah, it's the NFC North. So
could you imagine
the AFC equivalent of the black and blue division?
Could you imagine Scattaboo running behind Morgan Moses for a team? Could you imagine? Could you imagine the world imploding? Feels like something the Broncos would do. They get all my favorite players. All right, we discussed all of the issues that the Steelers have and didn't necessarily solve them, but we maybe gave you some options. We gave a lot of extra time to Pittsburgh. Let's go. Two more teams here. Cincinnati Bengals. Also some fascinating decisions here. They're in this kind of stars and scrubs world and figuring out how to keep their stars together and their stars happy. You've talked a lot about Joe Burrow continuing to lobby for T. Higgins to stay. Trey Hendrickson, they got to figure him out. He's the one guy that you could depend on last year on that defense. Everything else was rough, man. So Joe Burrow, they got to sign Jamar Chase soon. You got to figure out T. Higgins. You got to figure out Trey Hendrickson. And as of record time, Jermaine Pratt is asking for a trade. I've just shipped him off to the Colts, essentially, where Lou Anarumo is the new defensive coordinator. So I'm going to send Jermaine Pratt to the Colts for a draft pick. Let's just take care of that. And let's figure out how we're going to keep all of our stars together and happy in Cincinnati.
This is probably by far the most perilous pre-record team we could be talking about, because any and all of these moves could be done by the time this game or this episode goes out. It is fascinating because we've talked about this before, like Joe Burrow's public lobbying of the Bengals to basically spend money, right? Like the Bengals have been widely regarded for years as a cheap franchise, a team that does not like spending money. And yet they have broken their previous MO for Joe Burrow in several ways already, right? Since he's gotten here in a way that they didn't do. I mean, they drafted Carson Palmer #1 overall as well, right? Carson Palmer was like, the Joe Burrow of his time, the early 2000s, sort of. But like in terms of like, he's the guy. You find a franchise quarterback, let's go. And they didn't do that stuff for Palmer, but they've already broken, the way they do contracts for Burrow. They've built a dome to practice in, a bubble, so you're not practicing out on a field under an overpass with a train going by you in freezing sleet, in the winter. You can actually be inside. They've overhauled, the stadium. They're busy building upgrades left, right, and center. So, okay, it would be one more step, but breaking their contract structures again for T. Higgins, Jamar Chase, Trey Hendrickson, whatever, it would, it's just one more. Like Burrow is forcing you to modernize. You might as well go the whole way and keep the good players in the building.
I'm of the mind, like, just get it done. So, like, the sooner you have the big money out of the way, then you can start focusing on the issues, right? The defensive line issues, the defense overall, the offensive line depth, all these other things that you need to sort out. Just get the Jamar Chase deal done. And the sooner you do it, you know where the money is, you know where you can move it, you know where the flexibility is. You move Burrow's money around, right? That's the benefit of having the long-term quarterback contract is it's there and you know how you can manipulate the money to create immediate cap space and do what you have to do. I think the T. Higgins thing is trickier because I think they're a force, man. Like, they are a force to be reckoned with when it is Burrow, Chase, and Higgins. They're such a force that they could take one of the worst defenses in the NFL and almost sneak into the playoffs, right? They're such a force that they set such a deep hole for themselves. They needed 12 things to happen down the stretch, and 11 of them happened, and one more thing could have happened, and they were going to go into the playoffs and have a chance to upset Buffalo because that offense is that good. So keeping that nucleus together is really appealing. It's really appealing, but it's going to take shrewd cap management to have the money sorted in a way that you can have Burrow, Chase, and Higgins. And also, Trey Hendrickson in his prime, an elite pass rusher, top 5 type of pass rusher. You don't get those guys often. Just make it all. I'm of the mind you just kind of make it all work, make it all happen, and then you have to draft well. And then you have to draft well to complement it, or else you're going to be another 9-win team on the fringe of the playoffs.
I do wonder at the moment, I wonder if Chase's contract is actually the biggest stumbling block right now. Not that they won't get that one done, but that he's effectively, at this point, like I think all of them now understand that there's quite a lot of leverage here. I wonder if Chase is looking at this and saying, like, his number is just so crazy right now. Like I've heard talks that he's looking for $40 million a year
Right.
based off.
Sorry, really quick. The top receiver cornerbacks receiver contracts are up around 35. Like if you just got him at 35 before Myles Garrett makes his 40, before Micah Parsons probably makes 40, before you start looking around and saying who's got the biggest non-QB contract in NFL history, and Jamar Chase wants to have the biggest non-quarterback contract, like get him at 35 if he'll do it, unless maybe he does want the 40 right away.
Yeah, and it's and look, the cap's going to explode in a couple of years when TV deals are up again and blah blah blah. It always goes up, and these are never as bad as they look when you sign them. But Justin Jefferson effectively is the same kind of deal, but a year in advance, right? Jefferson's a year ahead of Chase. He just signed his monster deal, same school. He's up around 35 million. The assumption was that Chase was going to be like, let's just give me the Justin Jefferson deal with a couple of dollars on top so that I can be the number one guy and everybody's happy. But if he's actually like, no, I want Justin Jefferson's deal and I want to jump, that's tricky for a team that doesn't like to spend money. Like that's a potential major stumbling block. So yeah, like if you can get Jeff or Chase for anything like $35 million a year, get it locked in ASAP so you can work on everything else. But if he's really like heels dug in at 40, that's a problem that's going to take some time to try and find middle ground, because I think they're probably quite far away if that's the case. But if you end up having to sink $40 million a year or something like that into Jamar Chase, I still think it's a deal you should do. And eventually, 2 or 3 years' time, that deal will look fine. But right now, that would, I think, create a problem with the other contracts, getting them locked in.
Where do you stand with Higgins generally? I mean, are you just saying tag him? I mean, I don't see them going long term with Higgins. I think they're just going to try to stretch it out as far as possible.
So a second tag is $26 million, I think, for this year, because they already franchise tagged him, right? So a second tag is like 26, which puts him in the range of, in terms of APY of like where Cooper Kupp is based off his contract that he signed years ago and is still going. Devontae Smith, who's a number 2, like that's precedent, right? Those types of guys, right? So it's not terrible. I think that's definitely a viable option if they want to do that. It's obviously fully guaranteed money this year. I honestly think though, like I've said this somewhere else before, like if you were building a roster from scratch, right? Blank sheet of paper, we have the total salary cap space. We've talked about it before. You have 5 or 6 big contracts that you can hand out, and then you got to basically stitch the roster together with the remaining money, right? Those 5 or 6 contracts, if you're starting from a blank sheet of paper, are going to go to your quarterback, your wide receiver 1, your best pass rusher, probably your best cornerback, and maybe your best offensive tackle, right? That's 5. That would be the first 5 spots I would pick off for my big contracts. But you're not starting from a blank sheet of paper, right? They already have one of those deals in Burrow. Hendrickson, your best pass rusher, is another one that's looking for the money, so that makes sense. Chase, your best wide receiver, is looking for the money, so that makes sense. Higgins, wide receiver 2. That on a blank sheet of paper, optimal strategy is probably not one of the 5, but it is one of the top 8 positions that are coming up for contract that you need to make a decision on now. So would I, in an optimal world, want that money dedicated to like offensive tackle 1 or cornerback 1? Yeah, but that's not the decision right now. Like I'm not debating, do I pay T. Higgins or do I pay my elite number 1 corner who's available? That's not the option. It's like, do I pay T. Higgins or just keep the money? Because T. Higgins is going to leave. In that scenario, I keep T. Higgins.
And Higgins is the number 2 receiver for the Bengals, but he's wide receiver 1 on another, I don't know, 16 to 18 teams around the NFL, maybe more. So it's not like the great Corey Davis. That good. I know you're not big on Higgins for whatever reason. I think he's legit. And I think he looked like a wide receiver 1 when Chase got hurt a couple years ago. Higgins does have the durability. He has the durability questions, absolutely. But this isn't like Corey Davis. Remember, I loved Corey Davis coming out, but the reality was Corey Davis was the quintessential number 2 receiver in the NFL, right? You don't want him having more than 10 or 12 targets a game, or, you're not going to feed him high volume. But when he's opposite A.J. Brown, he can do some damage. win at the intermediate level, whatever. T. Higgins is way better than that. He's way better than the quintessential number 2. I think he's better than a Jacoby Myers or a Corey Davis, right? Those guys that currently make $13 to $18 million a year. He's a wide receiver 1 for at least half the league, we'll say. And so you have a chance to have 2 of those guys. You don't think so? He's not wide receiver 1 for half the league. Give me the teams where he's not wide receiver 1.
I mean, look, I just think he's one of the better wide receiver 2s in the NFL. But like, is he better than Devontae Smith? Is he better than, guys like that? I don't know that that's true. It doesn't really matter. The point being, he's a high-end wide receiver 2, and that's enough to make the case that you can pay him big money.
Yeah, so I'm with you. Like, I just make it all work. So I'm going to pay all the guys as a starting point. We're going to pay all the guys, and then all of them. We're going to cut my friend Jermaine Burton. That's probably might happen by the time we're recording this. Who knows? Probably got to get rid of him.
That's your fault individually.
Oh, because I didn't babysit him?
Yes. You knew exactly what the problem was, and you did not keep him on the straight and narrow.
Guy lives 5 minutes from me down the street, and I could have helped him.
It's a personal
I tried. I thought the preseason hug it out when I called him my wide receiver 4 was going to help him lead him down the right path during the season here.
No.
So probably got to get rid of Burton. Honestly, that's part of what makes the Higgins decision. Like if he did keep his head on straight, Burton, and he just let his talent play out, that's why I called it such an important draft pick. Not because it was definitely going to hit, but it was, if it hit, it would have let them move on from Higgins, right? Like if Burton played up to his talent, Sam, you might say, yeah, let T. Higgins walk. We have Jermaine Burton. He's a first-round caliber receiver. We don't need T. Higgins. But because Burton was, not showing up to practice and all the off-field stuff that he had, now you're kind of stuck with, we have to probably figure out T. Higgins.
Or if we'd seen, this big step forward in Princeton, Yoshivas, which again didn't really happen. Like I know he had some solid touchdown numbers and he made some clutch catches, but like he didn't take the big step where you're like, okay, he's ready to be wide receiver 2 in this offense. So both of the 2 options that could have made T. Higgins expendable didn't put their hand up for that kind of case. So again, you're back to like your decision is not T. Higgins versus spending that money on a tackle or a cornerback. It's like T. Higgins or no T. Higgins. And in that case, like if the only debate is money, pay the man.
Yeah. All right. So pay all the guys. Probably got to get rid of Burton. I love the pass rush was just inept last year outside of Trey Hendrickson. Massive regression from Sam Hubbard on the other side. They just did not have anybody who could get after the quarterback. I think this draft at pick 17, they've been paired with Walter Nolan out of Ole Miss quite a bit as a defensive tackle. The Mike Green, James Pierce, edge rushers, Nick Scourton, whoever it might be, just get one of those guys at 17. Pay Trey Hendrickson, get another rookie opposite them. Miles Murphy didn't really take that step forward that they were hoping. I mean, that's why it's not a strategy to just like draft the bet, draft well, make sure you draft well. But we said a couple years ago, the Bengals tried to draft positions of need where they could be cheap for a couple of years so they could pay these other stars. But when Miles Murphy doesn't develop and Amarius Mims has his struggles as a rookie at right tackle, it's a challenge, right? You need to hit on those picks. So you got to keep swinging at those positions, those high value positions where if you're going to pay all these stars, you're going to need a first contract edge or tackle or corner to play really well so that you can balance out the roster.
Yeah, like it's kind of unfortunate because the draft is such a crapshoot for everybody. An amazing draft can completely propel your franchise forward, immediately. Like if you just nail 7 straight draft picks, like all of a sudden you're in a completely different space than you were before. Equally, it doesn't take many misses to completely screw up an otherwise very sound plan. Like the Bengals, we've kind of ripped on them a little bit for being cheap, but like the Bengals have generally, from a process standpoint, I think done a really good job in recent years. But so many of the like sound process draft picks have missed so far. DJ, they really like future-proof that secondary, and almost all of the players that they tried to future-proof it with did not work out, right? Daxton Hill, first-round pick, was supposed to come in and future-proof the secondary. Didn't work. DJ Turner struggled, turned it around a little bit, but Miles Murphy, the first-rounder in his draft class, was supposed to be the complement to Trey Hendrickson, hasn't developed. Like so many of these picks that would have been transformative if they'd hit on them just didn't. And suddenly you're like, we planned this out for 2 years, and now this guy's supposed to play, and it's a problem now.
I do think the secondary has some potential. I love the way DJ Turner was playing before he got hurt. I love the way Dax Hill was playing before he got hurt. Cam Taylor-Britt was in and out of the lineup last year, getting benched or whatever. But I think Hill and Turner could be a really nice 1-2 punch in the new scheme here. They're probably going to play a little bit more man coverage with Al Golden coming in as the new defensive coordinator. So, look, they've got a lot of work to do, but I think just changing the scheme could be enough to get the most out of, say, or more out of Miles Murphy, last year's second rounder Chris Jenkins at defensive tackle, Geno Stone at safety. I think just changing the scheme could help at least get some of those players who either had potential or have previous production to get the most out of them. And then the Bengals just have to find a way to hit on the pass rushers in some of those high value positions that they're drafting.
I mean, they could stand to have one of those drafts where like the top several picks just all defense. Like offense is in a good spot. If you pay all the guys, you're bringing all those guys back. You know, the offensive line, sure, that could use some competition or depth or whatever, but it's okay. They were one of those lines where they've done that creep back toward average things, and sometimes you're going to get low end of outcomes for the group as a unit, and that's going to create a problem. But if you assume that doesn't happen 2 years in a row, the line's probably fine. So just all defense for those draft picks.
I don't know. The line's a little tricky, man, because the creep back toward average moves of Ted Karras and Alex Kappa, they were not great last year. They're all heading to the end of their contracts. They need to invest on the O-line as well. The one, when we talk about schematic advantages, though, we've seen Burrow overcome bad offensive lines. You don't want to live in that world that much, but when you have Higgins, that's part of the Higgins thing too, right? When you have guys to throw to, it helps overcome some of the line issues. You don't want to do this every year, but this might need to be the year where you invest in defense and say, hey, Joe, go be, Magic Man again next year, and hope that the outcomes are closer to average rather than below average like they were last year on the offensive line.
Right.
All right. Solved. Pay all the guys in Cincinnati. Cleveland Browns are up next. Picking number 2. Did you have anything else on the Bengals?
No.
All right. Before we get to the Browns, hit subscribe. Do the subscribe thing. Hit the thumbs up. Do all the things. Hit the button. Hit the bell. Make sure you know when Check the Mic is going live. We're giving a little extra time to the Norths here today, Sam. But we got the Cleveland Browns. They're picking at number 2 overall. And what are we doing here if we're the Browns? Let me start by saying I think the overall job that Andrew Berry has done has been good, solid, cogent, good. It's been good. The Watson thing has been awful, as we know. And it's Aaron Rodgers level of trickling down tentacles into all other parts of the organization. Awful. So the sooner you can get out from under Deshaun Watson, the better.
Other than the obvious, Mrs. Lincoln, did you enjoy the play? Like, is it possible to have a good overall job when you've committed literally the worst personnel move that's ever been made in NFL history?
Maybe, because I don't know how much of that was him plus ownership, coaches, or whatever. But my point is, like, if they were able to draft Cam Ward, I don't think Cam Ward's walking into this awful situation, right? That's what I'm saying, right? I think the infrastructure between Stefanski as a coach and an offensive line that certainly regressed, but I think can get back to form. Some pass catchers where they could use a little bit of juice, but they have some players there. Like, I think it's a good enough infrastructure for a rookie quarterback to come in and to build upon. Obviously, the most important decision has been awful and terrible, and every time a non-Deshaun Watson quarterback went out there, the team was better. That's bad. That's very bad.
Yeah, very bad. So, like, we don't have to relitigate it. It was literally, I think it's genuinely the worst personnel move that's ever been made in the NFL. There have been some terrible moves made, and even some terrible moves made recently, and nothing comes close to the Deshaun Watson deal with everything involved. The draft picks you had to give up to make it happen, the contract you signed him to that is still not just unprecedented, but like it's treated as an anomaly. Like the rest of the league did not treat that as precedent and continue with it and go like they went, no, that's ridiculous. That's an idiotic move the Browns did. We're not we're not acknowledging that as a thing. And the morality of the whole Deshaun Watson saga at the time. Like, it goes down as literally the worst move that's ever happened. So it leaves you in this spot where you're still saddled with this guy's contract. I can't imagine any team being willing to take that off your hands for anything. You can't really cut him. So the only way out of this, we are left with the decision of, at number 2 overall, do we draft a quarterback or not?
Maybe. Yeah. They need a quarterback.
And does that, the other question is, does that become more likely if Tennessee passes at 1?
I think it does. I mean, I think obviously we say this all the time, even though the consensus feels like there's 2 quarterbacks, Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders, doesn't mean that, like, in the Browns building, it could be Cam Ward or bust. Could be right. Shedeur or bust. So who the heck knows? But if it's Cam Ward or bust, then if he's available, they take him, right? So I think it does depend on what Tennessee's going to do, or if the Giants jump up to number 1 and take the guy that the Browns like. I mean, I'm curious how much they need to they do a full reset here as well. I've said this for the Jets. I've said this for the Raiders. Are they the type of team that should say, let's look to 2026. Let's make all of our moves toward the future. The quicker we can completely move on from the Watson thing, the better. But right now, while we're in the middle of this contract, it's going to be difficult. It's just going to be difficult to build the team around him. Like, let's make 2026 moves. And if that's the case, maybe you go best player available. You take Abdul Carter. You take Travis Hunter. You have to take shots at quarterback the same way I said with the Steelers. You go second wave of QBs. You get somebody in the building, somebody, that you just could hit on in the second, third, fourth round. And you just look to the future as you try to get unhitched from Watson. I
mean, so yeah, if you're doing that, you're trading away Myles Garrett. Like, you're blowing the thing up completely and stripping it all the way down to the studs. I don't know. Can they survive that? Like, that's another one of those. Can, as good a job as you think that Andrew Berry has done overall, can he survive going, this individual move was so bad that I have to rip everything out and start over?
Yeah, I'm not putting Andrew Berry in the Hall of Fame or anything like that. I'm not saying, but I'm saying we are 1 year removed from them, having 5 quarterbacks and dragging Flacco off the couch, and the defense was so good and the O-line and everything else was so good enough that they could make a little playoff run. Like, that's pretty good, given how bad their quarterback situation has been, right? So again, I view that as, like, to me, it's more difficult to make, tens of moves to get a good team together than it is to make one move at quarterback. Now, the one move at quarterback is the most important one, and it's a challenge, and you gotta have a good process to do it. But several moves were really good to put the infrastructure in place for the Browns. And I don't think they're that far off. Like, they're one of the better number 2 overall picking teams that you'll see from a roster perspective. How's that for a moral victory for the Browns?
Yeah, it's like that question. Are they the best 4-2 team of all time? Are the Browns the best number 2 pick team in the draft of all time?
Maybe they are.
Obviously, missing a quarterback is always a problem, but missing it in the way they missed it had significantly bigger ramifications than if they just drafted a quarterback at 2 and that didn't work out. And, you just set yourself back a year or two. Like, this has crippled the team because Deshaun Watson's cap number for 2025 is $72.9 million, like, currently. So it's not only that you just missed on a guy, it's that you missed on a guy and his giant fully guaranteed contract is a colossal albatross hanging around your neck, just decaying in front of you, and you're stuck with it. Like, and the only way out of that is to either rip it all apart or draft a quarterback at number 2. His contract is like $10 million a year. What's $10 more million? Well, you've already got, a cap number of 72. Yeah. That is one way out of that if you nail that guy and, like, he's actually good.
I'll draft Cam Ward if he's there. If not, I'll go second wave quarterback. And I'm not saying, like, the roster still does need work. Like, it was in better shape 2 or 3 years ago. Now, a lot of those good moves 2 or 3 years ago, you're talking about an O-line that is getting older and might need to be replenished. I mean, this is why I'm thinking looking to the future might be the way to go. And look, even looking to the future, I would still want Myles Garrett as part of that future. I would still rather him Like I'd
Myles
rather
Garrett
him.
doesn't want to be part of that future, though.
I know that. I'm just, you have the sit down. You sit down. Look, you're Brown for life. We want you to go in the Hall of Fame as the Browns. We're gonna 2026. We're gonna set this thing up to win. You talk to him. You talk to him. But if you got to trade him, you got to trade him. You just got to get some picks back and think to 26, man.
Yeah, I mean, look, I would want to keep him too, but I mean, at his age, there's no reason he would want to stay around for that. So if you're tearing this thing down, I think you're trading away Myles Garrett is one of the first things you're doing, maximizing what you can get for him, and that's what he would want as well. So those are which way are we going? Are we swinging at a quarterback and hoping we can fix this now, or are we rebuilding?
Pick one. I don't care.
You're picking two. Pick the quarterback. It's the easiest way out of this is to just draft a quarterback and hope that guy's good.
All right. So Cam Ward or Shedeur Sanders. I'll take either. Go. So we're just going to take a quarterback.
Right.
And then I do believe you got to future-proof the offensive line a little bit more. They did regress last year. Again, I don't know how much of that is the Watson residual effect. They had their own issues picking up stunts and blitz, but the quarterback's a big part of that. I think he made the line look worse.
Remember, though,
go ahead.
The second you don't have to deal with Deshaun Watson, you no longer have to run like some idiot version of the offense that you think he can adjust to. Like you can go back to Stefanski's offense.
Yeah. No, and Stefanski's shown he's been a good coach and he's gotten the most out of, or he's gotten a lot out of, Baker Mayfield at points and Flacco and Winston, Jameis. Bringing Jameis back as the backup if he wants to come back. Got to do that. I mean, no, if you're going to draft a guy at 2, I mean, you still might need a backup. His DTR has been pretty bad. I might double up at quarterback. We're going to take Shedeur Sanders and Dylan Gabriel. We're doubling up here. What else from a roster perspective for the Browns here?
Yeah, I mean, you might have to cut Jack Conklin, so I think you're going to need offensive line tackle help regardless of what you do. Nick Chubb is now a free agent coming off his knee injury and what he was last season, so you probably need a running back.
Draft
Jerome
one
Ford
of the deep
solid
receivers. I mean, running back. Draft someone from the deep running back class, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're in a position where I think that their flaws can be not completely solved necessarily, but like the weaknesses can definitely be attacked in this draft where they have like 1 million draft picks. So your world, Andrew Berry, GM of the year outside of the worst move that's ever been made. Ton of draft capital, right? So draft Cam Ward at the top of the draft. We pick again at 33. That's a position where if we want to trade out, that's the sexy spot, right? Everyone wants to be the first pick of the second round to see who fell from the first round into day 2. So we can potentially parlay that into even more draft picks. We can pick 25 times. We can fix the whole roster in one draft.
There we go. Turn 12 into 18 picks and get younger. That's it. It's a get younger year. The take a shot on quarterback discussion is always fascinating because you don't always know. And it's like, hey, the Browns drafted Myles Garrett in 2017 in a year where people didn't know who the best quarterback was that year, right? There were legitimate debates between Mitch Trubisky, Patrick Mahomes, and Deshaun Watson. Obviously, hindsight is clear as day, Sam. They shouldn't have taken Myles Garrett. They should have taken Patrick Mahomes. We all know that now. But that is like, those are the debates here. Like, you just keep taking shots at quarterback and you're giving up an Abdul Carter. You're giving up a Travis Hunter. You're giving up a Mason Graham, whoever it might be, for hope that this guy becomes the next elite quarterback, even though there's like an 8% chance that that's going to happen. That's the world you're living in. But the payoff is multiple championships when you get the right guy, perhaps. So that's probably why you have to take shots at the quarterback.
Yeah.
And what we're going to do as the Browns.
Right.
Let's
give them some draft picks, given that they have 1 million of them.
Yeah, let's go do that. I was thinking Wyatt Millum, my guy from West Virginia. I know he had his struggles at the Senior Bowl, but could play either tackle spot, maybe some guard, whatever it might be. I think he could add some good depth in that 2nd to 3rd round range.
All right.
If we're trading down from 33.
Yeah. I would Cam Ward at number 2. I would take the best offer on the table for that coveted 33 pick. Like there will be teams looking to try and grab somebody that slipped out of the first round. That happens, most years. So if you trade back to, I don't know, it's 39, 40, somewhere in that range, right? You drop a few spots. you pick up somebody like that. Then what's our next pick? We pick at number
Where's Millam
67.
now on the Where's Millam on the consensus board these days? He's at 68. See, we get Millam there.
There you go. Okay,
There's your
so we'll
tackle
pick somebody else
prospect.
then at 30, 39, 40.
39, 40. I like defensive. Darius Alexander from Toledo, from this
That's where we
defensive
can
line
get,
group.
but that's where we can get really greedy, right? Because there's always somebody that's like consensus number 30 who slips into the 40s, like the classic, the corners last year happened to, right? You had a bunch, like this time a year ago, Terry and Arnold and the other Alabama corner, Kool-Aid McKinstry. Kool-Aid McKinstry, like these were both guys that were expected to go mid-first round, right? And McKinstry ends up slipping in the second.
We're talking final year of the contract for Martin Emerson, Greg Newsome, 3 offensive linemen. Like this is why getting younger at those spots are important. So yeah, I'd take one of those corners that might fall, especially if the injured guys fall that I keep mentioning.
That's what I'm saying.
So,
like one of those injured guys, if they end up getting drafted at like number 39 or 40, it's going to seem like if you put that in a mock draft now, people are like, that guy's never going to slip to that. But like one of them could easily.
Yeah. Cooper DeJean will never be available at 40. We'll never see that. All right. I like that. So we've got Cam Ward. We got an offensive lineman. We have a corner getting younger at some key spots here. Get one of those second wave receivers, the receiver depth. You got to pick up one of those guys by Jaden Higgins or Jack Besh, whatever it might be. And got to get a running back round 3 or 4.
Right.
There we go. Browns are fixed. On our way.
More or less.
It's a good show, Sam. It's a good job.
Good.
Appreciate everybody for tuning in. As always, we're 3/4 of the way through the league. Again, this was pre-recorded. Appreciate everybody for tuning in through all these. Go check out the previous ones as we fixed every team in 5 to 20 minutes. And we'll have one more. We got the Souths that we're going to break down on Thursday's show here during Combine Week. Again, make sure you're subscribed. Make sure you've got the bell. Make sure you hit the thumbs up. Do all the things on the way out if you're watching YouTube. We appreciate everybody for tuning in here. We'll see you again tomorrow with more. Check the mic.